Hey everyone, welcome to Zhangshan's Business Interviews. I am Xiaozhen. This is an in-depth interview series produced by Language Level World Studio. We hope to explore new worlds together with you, starting right here. Today's episode is special. We're recording on the 1st of December 2025, and our guest is Ji Chao, also known as Pick, the co-founder and chief scientist of Manus, just this past early morning. Michigan to announce the full acquisition of Manus. But at the time of this recording, which was earlier this month, the acquisition hadn't happened yet. So, in the end, this episode became the final interview with Manus.
Hey, Pick first say hello to everyone and give us a quick introduction. Okay, hi everyone. I am Ji Chao. My friends call me Pick. I am a co-founder and the chief scientist at Madison & Company. I am really honored to be part of this recording today. Your life story seems pretty unique from the start. You moved to the US at just 4 years old. Came back to China for second grade, started a business in high school, dropped out of college.
Started another business, and then finished grad school. Tell us about that journey.
Wow.
First, I think I was lucky with my family background. My father is a physics professor at Peking University, a traditional scientist. My mother was a serial entrepreneur from the older generation of Zhongguanggen. You could call her an entrepreneur now, I guess. So I grew up with these two different, let's not call them cultures, but these two different styles. I think I found a middle ground between them, becoming what you'd call a tech entrepreneur as a kid. I wasn't the smartest student. My grades were just average, but I loved tinkering and figuring things out on my own. I was average, I had my strengths and weaknesses in different subjects. Honestly, I don't really know if I was a good student or if I am smart, because I feel like I never really studied the right way. But I was fortunate because I found what I love to do pretty early. That was around 2009, the second year after Apple released the iPhone. For me, a huge change came with the App Store. The App Store was a major turning point for me before it existed. There were lots of people like me who loved tinkering with software and building things, but we lacked a good way to monetize our work globally. For a high school student back then, if you were just messing around with stuff outside of school, it was kind of seen as going off the beaten path. There wasn't a good third-party metric to prove that my hobby had real value. The App Store gave me that chance. It allowed me to show my parents, classmates, and even teachers that this thing I was tinkering with could actually generate economic value. So I guess I was part of China's first wave of software entrepreneurs going global, and I was still in high school at the time. I developed and launched a specialized third-party web browser for the iOS platform, which I named Mammoth Browser. It successfully garnered a decent amount of public buzz and discussion. I employed the simplest possible business model, a direct buy a copy, sell a copy system, which guaranteed a consistent fixed amount of revenue for every single unit sold. Consequently, I was quite fortunate to experience a remarkably consistent and dependable stream of cash flow from the very outset. Just how consistently unwavering was that financial inflow. It proved remarkably stable from the very first versions released to the last one produced. I made over 300,000 US dollars for a high school junior or senior. That was pretty exciting. The key was that the sales model was super clear. I didn't have to worry about in-app purchases or offering premium features. I just honestly sold copies one at a time. So for me, the maintenance cost was low, and it was a viable business model at the time. But as we all know now, mobile software doesn't really support that simple model anymore because everyone's focused on acquiring users for free first. It was an interesting time because we were transitioning from desktop to mobile internet. There was a platform shift, or simply a change in the hardware medium. So when a new medium emerges, even the big players like China's BAT back then, or overseas companies were all starting from scratch, trying new things. It felt like a bit of a Wild West period. So there were lots of opportunities to do things like this. People hadn't figured out all the business models that came later. But looking at AI now, I'm just thinking out loud, the hard part is that while AI is a new technological breakthrough, there isn't a completely new platform emerging. So this time, I don't think there's that same Wild West period, whether it is giant startups or individual developers. Everyone's moving just as fast and acting decisively. So I guess I was lucky to catch a good era. How did that first venture end well? I don't think there was a clear ending moment. It was more like the starting point of my entrepreneurial journey. I wouldn't strictly call it a startup back then. I was just a student, an individual developer, using a simple business model to generate some cash flow. At the time, I had some cash flow, but also had to do my own marketing. I didn't have a team. It was just me posting on forums, both in China and abroad. Back then, China didn't have mature payment channels like we do now. On the App Store today, you can use Alipay, WeChat, or credit cards. But I remember back then, it only supported international credit cards. So there were hardly any paying users in China. That sounds a bit like the AI scene now. Anyway, since it was hard to get cash flow domestically, I figured I'd just build buzz in China. So I cracked my own software and shared it on Chinese forums. If you couldn't pay, you could at least show some support. While doing that, my activities started receiving considerable attention from the broader investment world. That development was also quite interesting and genuinely noteworthy. When I was a high school junior or senior, I attended what genuinely felt like a remarkably entrepreneurial event in the bustling technology district of Zhongguangkun. I can't precisely recall the specific name of that particular event, It was at this memorable gathering that I first encountered key people from GenFund. The story itself is quite straightforward. It was Mr. Xu, yes, that very same Mr. Xu, who approached me and asked, "Hey kid," he stated, "you are honestly pretty good. Have you considered starting a business?" And naturally, I immediately responded with a no. Why would I want to embark on starting a business when I already had a perfectly steady cash flow that allowed me to earn money comfortably while I was still attending school? But, it was Mr. Xu, so I'm pretty well known, especially since he came from the Peking University network. So I went home and mentioned it to my parents. I am really grateful to them for this. They said it was something we're seriously considering. That put me in a tough spot. I had a few choices. I could apply to a good university and take the path most people follow. But on the other hand, the App Store gave me such positive feedback. It showed that if you innovate, you might get rewarded. Of course, that was a bit naive thinking that if you build something good, good results will naturally follow. I gradually realized that wasn't the norm. I was just lucky to catch a wave. Well, I figured I could always go back to school later. So I thought, what I really need to prioritize now is the opportunity cost, right? So I took a term sheet and decided to drop out of college to start a business. But the reason I accepted GenFund's offer back then was also because they gave me a promise they've kept to this day, that they wouldn't interfere with what I do. I could do whatever I wanted. So for a student, I thought that was the best possible choice. So I teamed up with a few other classmates who were 2 years ahead of me and had already gotten into Peking University. But I managed to convince them to join me, of course. We realized that the simple model of making money by selling copies of something wasn't going to work anymore. We could already feel it wasn't working. Yeah, it was pretty obvious because another 2 years had passed by then. You could see that both domestically and internationally, especially in the third-party iPhone browser market, a lot of different players had emerged. The big players had caught on, so we knew it was definitely going to move toward a free or freemium model. But back then, we still gave it one last shot. This was actually the starting point for everything that followed. We thought that if we were going to sell a paid browser, it needed a major leap in functionality. First off, the interaction design of NetSurf browser at the time was pretty good. But there was another factor back then, both in China and abroad. We were in the early stages of 3G mobile internet. It wasn't as smooth as it is now. People were more concerned about what to do when the network was slow or in weak signal areas. So I proposed solving one problem. Could we predict the user's next click, for example? I remember people using Facebook, or actually Ronren, which was the Chinese version. Was it still called Xianei back then? Or had it changed to Ronren? I remember many people felt the web version. The mobile web version seemed better than the early native apps. So a lot of people were actually using mobile browsers for social media, which meant a lot of scrolling and clicking to the next page. And more people were starting to read news on their phones too. I thought if I could accurately predict a user's next click, I could preload the next page's content, making the response much faster. And that is how, by chance, I got into NLP, natural language processing. Nowadays, people might not talk about it as much because large language models have unified everything. So around 2010 or 2011, because of this need, I started researching this direction. It was really early days, and I think I was lucky. The things I learned were always driven by concrete needs, which aligned well with my interests. So I got into this field and started working on it. So what really ended that browser project, I found something more interesting, natural language processing, because its model was always simple sell one copy. Then another, it gradually became something no one maintained. Eventually, as iOS kept updating, its compatible version became incompatible with iOS. So it naturally got removed from the App Store. It was a natural death, but I still think I was lucky
because my initial product thoughtfully combined the ambitious goal of going global, the innovative power of artificial intelligence, and a clear path to monetization, which represented a genuinely great start. Looking back now, if you had steadfastly stuck with the browser, could you truly have caught the significant mobile internet wave? Was that a real possibility? I often think back to that time, pondering.
I actually received some acquisition offers. Maybe selling would have been good. But who made the offers? Let's not get into that. Can't name names. But I think browsers from ancient times to today, even with teams working on AI browsers. Now, we might talk about that later, have always had one thing in common. They're not really suited for entrepreneurs or disruptors. They're more like something for giants who already have distribution channels to add as a cherry on top. So looking back with my current experience, I don't think I could have made a better choice. What about the second startup, the direction of the second startup? The second startup direction actually stems from what I just mentioned, the first real startup. While working on the browser, I realized NLP was really fascinating. But 2011 was an interesting time. A groundbreaking paper came out. I'm not talking about Transformer. Actually, in 2013, it was Word2Vec by Google. It was the first time we could reliably and efficiently turn discrete natural language text into dense vectors. For me, that was the most mind-blowing turning point because it finally allowed us to easily apply methods from other fields like machine learning and deep learning to natural language processing. Around 2011, people in NLP focused on a few things for complex analysis. There was dependency parsing, but that term is pretty much dead. Now, the new AI generation might not even know it. For Chinese, we also dealt with tokenization, though compared to modern LLM tokenization, it was more primitive because Chinese, among other languages, fundamentally has a pronounced segmentation issue. A characteristic actually not just inherent to Chinese, but also markedly present in Japanese and German. This often involves complex decomposition or intricate word splitting. So back then, our team was primarily working on highly specialized computational solutions for natural language processing NLP, which, when evaluated in today's advanced technological terms and demands, were regrettably not very scalable or universally adaptable. You needed heavy annotation to make it work, and the models themselves weren't that powerful. So the biggest inspiration for me was the 2013 Word2Vec paper. It felt like a whole new world opened up. That is when I realized my real interest was in NLP, not in continuing with the browser. And I am grateful GenFund kept their promise. I said I didn't want to work on the browser anymore, and they said, sure, whatever. So I turned my focus to NLP, but also because I saw another market opportunity, though looking back, I think I was wrong. What happened was, by 2013, there were rumors that Apple was working on a wearable device, which later became the Apple Watch. That gave me a huge imagination boost because at the time, search was still about typing a query and getting 10 blue links. That worked because we were interacting with a large screen, like a computer. But if wearable devices or voice interfaces became more mature, that interaction model might not work. So the problem I wanted to solve was, could I revolutionize how knowledge interacts with users in a more structured and compact way that led to a direction, now called semantic search? I thought this would be the next Google as an entrepreneur. Could I be like Google back in the day, disrupting the industry? Our team was really excited, and the problem we wanted to solve gradually became more refined. It was a very technology-driven issue. I was thinking, if you want to answer users' questions in a more compact structure, you can't just rely on raw web page information. Because as we all know, how search engines work is basically like this. You type in a keyword, and they rank all the pages containing that keyword using some algorithm, then give you the top 10 results. So when a user asks a question, what they end up getting is still the original text, just free-form content. Now, think about it. If you're using an Apple Watch, you are not going to keep scrolling through a long article to read it all, right? And if it is a car interface or something like Siri, you can't have it recite such lengthy text either, because our attention span for listening is pretty limited. It can get frustrating. So from a technical standpoint back then, what was missing? It was an efficient, compact representation, a way to express information concisely. And the concept we landed on at the time was the knowledge graph. Now, knowledge graph is kind of an old term these days, a bit outdated. But back then, we were an ambitious team really pushing the idea of knowledge graphs. Digging deeper, we asked what was really holding back the practical application of knowledge graphs. One key issue we identified was that knowledge graphs just weren't comprehensive enough. Back then, whether it was general knowledge graphs or industry-specific ones, they all had limitations. Even in specialized fields, building a knowledge graph was a huge undertaking. It heavily relied on human input. Like if you wanted one for a specific industry, say manufacturing or scientific research, you'd need experts to annotate everything. They'd label things in triplets like subject, predicate, object for general knowledge graphs. There were a few big platforms out there like Freebase, which I think Google later bought, where people contributed knowledge through crowdsourcing that eventually evolved into a project under the Wikimedia Foundation called Wikidata. What it does is take you, for example, teacher, Zhang, you are an entity. You have various attributes like your birth date, your previous work experience, your show, and so on. This creates relationships between different entities, forming what is called a knowledge graph. But obviously, this whole thing depends entirely on humans. This particular situation genuinely felt like a significant bottleneck for our internal operations. Consequently, we were quite determined to discover and implement an effective method to fully automate this process. Yet, a critical question arose: what capabilities could the technology of that time truly provide? Indeed, natural language processing, or NLP at that specific time, was still undoubtedly in its very early, somewhat messy and foundational stages of development. Nevertheless, among the limited but established methodologies available at that juncture, there was one specific foundational approach known as named entity recognition, or NER, which offered a way to identify elements. Basically, when an AI model reads an article, it can identify and tag all the entities mentioned. But that only gives you the entities like Zhang Xiaojun is one entity. This show is another. A knowledge graph needs connections, edges between these entities. So where do those come from? Another technique back then was relation extraction. It detects relationships between two entities. For example, Zhang Xiaojun is the host of this show. Host here is the edge, or predicate. So with these two techniques, what kind of knowledge graph could we build well? If we limited the domain, we could do a decent job identifying entity. And if we predefine the types of relationships to extract, we could manage that too. Like, if I already know relationships, like who is the host of a show or what is someone's birth date, that works. But clearly, this isn't scalable, right? Because the possible relationships between any two entities are practically infinite. So we realized the existing tech had its limits, and we started researching something new. Later, this became known in academia as open information extraction, or OpenIE. The difference from earlier methods was that it didn't require predefined rules or schemas. I didn't have to specify what counted as an entity because traditional NER focused on a fixed set like person names, locations, organizations. That is essentially a whitelist approach, and we wanted to avoid that. Similarly, for relation extraction, we didn't want preset relationships. We aimed for a schemaless, completely open extraction. So what we ended up developing was this: an AI that could read a text, identify potential entities and their relationships on its own, extract them as triplets, and continuously build a knowledge graph automatically. That was a pretty significant breakthrough at the time. and we took the hardest path possible. We trained our models from scratch, and remember, this started around late 2013, early 2014. I was both lucky and unlucky to be right in the middle of the NLP boom. Initially, our team split into two groups. One worked on a solution based on traditional dependency parsing, while my side focused on a Word2Vec-based approach. After a few years, we saw potential to scale up, so we moved to using RNNs, then RNNs with attention. But eventually, we realized that Word2Vec, or RNNs with attention, still lost a lot of information at the input layer. If you relied purely on word vectors, it couldn't distinguish between different meanings of the same word. Take Sunday Wukong, for example. It could be the Monkey King from the Chinese classic Journey to the West, or the character from Japan's Dragon Ball, or even the hero in Honor of Kings. With Word2Vec type tech, the same word gets compressed into the same 512 or 768 dimensional vector, regardless of context. That specific situation deeply frustrated our entire team. We urgently required an encoding method that truly understood contextual nuances. And honestly, those particular years were exceptionally exciting. It genuinely felt as though almost anything we could vividly imagine or conceive. The rapidly advancing field consistently managed to deliver and actualize. The advent of transformers largely alleviated the persistent and complex problem of contextual understanding within our system. However, a significant drawback consistently emerged. With every subsequent technological leap and innovative breakthrough, years of our work basically became obsolete. It was tough. We kept at it from late 2014 until 2018 to finally get it done. We trained all our models from scratch, which was a massive effort, and we were dealing with what were considered large models back then. 2 models totaling about 0.3B parameters. That was truly huge at the time, though now. Its significance seems practically nothing. We also frequently encountered rather significant early issues. For instance, with BERT, if my memory serves me correctly, its default context length was set at a mere 512 tokens, precisely 512. And critically, once properly accounting for the necessary CLS and SEP tokens, you were left with merely 510 usable tokens. If the aim was for an AI to comprehensively read web pages entirely autonomously, however, it quickly became clear that this capability simply wasn't enough consequently. By late 2018, we strategically commenced addressing the increasingly significant challenges posed by long context problems, our pioneering solution. At that specific time, featuring a 16K context length now appears quite fundamental and rather basic. If my recollection is accurate, that particular model was later made publicly available as an open source project. We consistently kept pushing forward with our development efforts and eventually built a distinctive product called Maggie Nike, named after supercomputer from a favorite anime of mine. It did exactly what we described. AI that could browse the web, read articles across any domain, and continuously build and update a knowledge graph. What we were doing back then would now be called lifelong learning, or continuous learning. It was a lot of fun. Honestly, that project was something we were incredibly passionate about to this day. I still feel it was the peak of my intellectual programming and research abilities. After that, I guess I just started getting older. My skills began to decline. But back then, as we kept pushing forward, it became really painful because innovation in the outside world was just happening way too fast. Then one day in 2019, I got early access to GPT-3 and I felt like the sky was falling. Seriously, why? Well, here's the thing. As I mentioned, we had chosen a really tough path. We wanted to do full vertical integration. We built our own models and our own products from scratch. Every time we wanted to iterate on a product, we had to wait for our underlying model to catch up. And those models back then, compared to what we have now, were tiny, incredibly tiny, but it was still a massive headache. We had to handle our own infrastructure too. So our iteration cycle was basically 2 to 3 weeks for a model update. But back then, 2 to 3 weeks in the outside world felt like an eternity of change. When I got my hands on GPT-3 and tested it, I realized why I felt doomed. I took the same tasks, wrote a quick prompt for GPT, nothing fancy back then. We were all just winging it. And I found it was on par with our own fine-tuned model. Can you believe it? And I immediately realized something, even though it was expensive at the time, it was a game changer. In the NLP field back then, when people networked, it was very clear-cut. I'd introduce myself. Hi, I am from Maggie's team. We work on information extraction. Someone else did machine translation. Another worked on customer service systems. It was all very distinct. We shake hands, say, let's learn from each other. But our domains were separate. GPT-3's arrival proved something. It seemed like all these different tasks could be unified. It wasn't the first sign, though. Before that, Google had a paper called FLAN-T5 that hinted at this possibility. However, in that earlier historical period, the widespread belief among nearly everyone was, wow, Google is truly amazing. They have certainly developed a very impressive demonstration. Yet for highly specialized vertical applications, there remains a fundamental need for expert specialists, precisely like us. Then GPT-3 comprehensively and utterly crushed that previously held notion entirely. My immediate first reaction was an urgent, almost desperate thought. We absolutely need to divest ourselves of the company and do so quickly. So did you ultimately sell it?
We did to whom cashed out, right? You were really ahead of the curve. Listening to you, it sounds like what you were doing back in 2011 is similar to what people are doing now. It is like you went through the whole cycle already. I wouldn't say it is exactly the same. It is more that the core challenges people face at each stage are similar. But solving a problem at one stage doesn't mean you've solved it for when it reappears in the future. For example, back then, long context meant going from 512 tokens to 16K.
Yeah.
Long context might mean 200K to 2 million tokens. So history rhymes, but it doesn't repeat. What was your goal back then? It feels like you were just climbing the technology ladder, but what were you actually aiming for? That is a great question.
And this is a crucial element I didn't fully figure out or implement during my last entrepreneurial startup. I was undeniably pretty young at that time. Still gaining experience, I frequently see many ambitious young founders today who share that very same inherent trait. The significant upside is their remarkable authenticity. They're very true to their core selves. They passionately pursue exactly what they're deeply passionate about, driven by conviction. You could also accurately frame it as clearly identifying a significant, unsolved technical problem. If a technical problem is genuinely unsolved, it often aligns with first principles. It is a significant issue that needs solving. So back then, if we shifted to the product side, we faced a few issues. One was this idea that we should build a successful search engine to replace Google. First, we underestimated how hard building a search engine really is. Many people didn't know this. But for the Maggie project, we didn't use any third-party search. We built everything from scratch, the crawler, the indexing engine, all hand-coded. That was the peak of my engineering skills. But we also underestimated something. Having a strong tech stack doesn't solve non-technical problems. For instance, I'm not very optimistic about anyone building a new search index today. Many data sources and Google have formed a mutually beneficial cyclical relationship. As a new entrant, you simply can't replicate the data sources Google has accumulated over 20 years. So on the product side, we failed partly due to technical and non-technical reasons. Another thing we were really hoping for was the emergence of a new generation of wearable devices, or a completely new human-computer interface. Even today, wearables haven't fully taken off, and a truly new interface might only have arrived with things like ChatGPT. So our product mistakes were a mix of technical issues and simply being too early. That is just how startups are. If you are one step ahead, you are a pioneer. If you are 10 steps ahead, you are a martyr. In our case, we were the martyrs. Thirdly, our business model wasn't very clear. We initially wanted to build a purely consumer-facing product and scale it, but after years of constant technical iteration, you get anxious. So we thought about switching to B2B, but that clearly wasn't our team's DNA. The startup experience taught me a lot. It was also incredibly fulfilling. It was the dream state for many founders, getting to work on your life's ambition. What was that ambition? My life's ambition was to build something completely from the ground up, my own infrastructure, my own models to solve a problem that others hadn't solved well. But Google had already solved that problem, and I hadn't solved it better. What do you think Google didn't solve? Well, first, Google acquired Freebase, which gave them a great community. They had a project called Knowledge Vault or something similar. We did a head-to-head comparison. At the highest confidence level, our accuracy was around 89, so we were more accurate. Plus, we supported not just Chinese, but other languages too, including right-to-left scripts like Arabic. That might not seem like a big deal now, but it was impressive back then. We also built our own vector search system from scratch, which is pretty common now, to handle scale. I remember collaborating with Intel on a new solution using their persistent memory technology. We wrote our own vector search based on the HNSW algorithm and built the whole system. I got to try every technology I ever wanted in a reasonable way, using investor money. The moment that project was done, I felt my life was complete. So after that, even with what I am doing now at Manus, I don't have that burning need to prove myself or achieve something before I can die without regrets. I already have no regrets. That lets me approach things with a much more relaxed mindset. So he went and got a job after that. Yeah, I worked for about a year and a half. That work experience was actually really enjoyable, really enjoyable. Why was it a big company? It was a unicorn at the time, about a year or so before its planned IPO. It coincided with the GPT era. I joined because GPT-3 made me see the danger for my startup. So I was there from before ChatGPT launched until after that generation of models. I essentially built their LLM business from zero. How was the work culture there? A lot of people didn't like one aspect. It was a B2B company. And in classic B2B fashion, a key question is how you quantify customer value. Beyond final business metrics, you need process metrics too. So there was a system where all the research and algorithm teams were essentially competing on internal leaderboards. Part of one team's task was to, I translate all user needs into quantifiable benchmarks. And that is exactly what research and algorithm roles love to do, compete on leaderboards. So back then, my main job was climbing those rankings. And it was actually really fun. The company had this interesting incentive program, kind of like an internal leaderboard system, similar to Kaggle. And the more you won, the better the prizes were. You could earn more GPUs. So you'd enter this cycle where the strong just keep getting stronger. I ended up hoarding dozens of cards myself with a bunch of GPU resources just sitting idle. But that meant I could tinker with all sorts of things I wanted to try out. Since there were always clients with needs, I could run tons of experiments. And with the most abundant computing power, I could scale up easily. So for that year and a half, I consistently held the top spot on the leaderboard. That experience was just incredibly satisfying.
You didn't seem to have that same drive back in school. Were you the type of top student who was really into comparing grades and scores? Doesn't sound like it. No, because I skipped a lot of classes. I am actually really grateful to my high school. I attended the affiliated high school of Peking University. I feel incredibly lucky to have met a group of super open-minded teachers. I mean, they were so open-minded that if there was a class you didn't want to attend, they'd just say, then don't go. Later on, the school even gave me, well, not exactly a free pass, but we had a computer club. It was basically an office on campus. I could go to even during class hours. We had air conditioning and computers where I could really dive into the stuff I loved. I felt so fortunate. At the moment your second startup ended, what were you doing? What was going through your mind? My thinking at the time was this. I knew a new technology was emerging that could potentially kill my business. So what was my choice? Obviously to join it, right? But my mindset back then was shaped by the trauma from my previous startup. Trying to do vertical integration yourself is really painful. I often use this analogy. Every day you wake up feeling like the tide is rising.
but you have no idea how high it will get. Maybe by the next morning, the water's already up to your nose. It is a terrifying feeling. So I still loved entrepreneurship, but I didn't want to do vertical integration anymore. That led to a pretty natural thought. Back then, people categorized AI startups into several layers. There was the model layer, the infrastructure layer, and the application layer. So I thought, okay, I basically have 3 paths in front of me. By late 2022 or early 2023, after everyone saw ChatGPT, a lot of institutions and model companies in China were already getting moving. Of course, I talked to everyone, but no one could convince me about what to actually do with this because I really didn't want to experience that awful, stressful state again. I focused more on the so-called infrastructure layer and application layer, but there was also a problem. Everyone was talking about it, but no one really knew what a true AI application role should look like, especially around mid-2023. There were probably only 2 products with real product market fit or any significant buzz, ChatGPT and Character AI. And with something like Character AI, it was very clear. I didn't understand it. I tried using it myself and just couldn't get into it. So I figured if I am not the user, I definitely can't build a good product in that space. As for ChatGPT, that was a perfect storm of timing conditions. And I still believe that the moment ChatGPT exploded onto the scene, the race was basically over. So I knew I wanted to work on applications or infrastructure, but I hadn't figured out what exactly to do.
Right.
So I explored some opportunities and also looked into related projects. I spent some time at GenFund,
Yeah.
I was at GenFund for a while. It was also a chance to connect with younger entrepreneurs. I could share my past, like my tough experiences and lessons, and give them a heads up. So in today's episode, I also want to share some of those hard-earned lessons later on. I actually met Xiaohong, who is now the CEO of Manus. He is the one who convinced me to join. Or rather, that is why I decided to start this after my second startup.
How long was the gap in between, that year and a half at GenFund? A year and a half gap, yeah. During that time, you were clear that you didn't want to work on large models or join any big model company. I talked to almost all the major model companies. Were there any you liked? Google.
I talked to companies both overseas and domestically, right? Overseas, there weren't many back then. I basically talked to all of them. And domestically, I talked to everyone too, including why Google weren't you trying to beat them precisely? Because you couldn't beat them. You develop a special respect for them. My thinking back then was that I wanted to find an AI product, not one I would lead myself, but more like a blank canvas. That is the feeling. Because, by the end of my last startup, I learned one very important thing. I realized I am just not CEO material. I don't enjoy commercialization, and I really dislike managing people.
Yeah.
So I consider that paying tuition. I learned I shouldn't be the CEO. I should find someone more suited for the CEO role than me. What aspects do you think make you unsuitable as a CEO? I think it is largely an emotional resistance. Emotional resistance, why? What is annoying about being a CEO? Human nature. For one, I'd much rather deal with computers. I love working with computers. I think people are too complex. As an organization grows, you realize the complexity increases exponentially. I am not cut out for that. I can't handle too many of those subtle interpersonal dynamics. You seem much more outgoing than Xiaohong. No. Actually, everyone at our company except Chantal is an extrovert. I am an extrovert. Well, I am an outgoing introvert. When I'm talking to you about specific business matters, I can talk a lot. But actually, you are an Inting Oh, Inting feels so common now. Everyone's kind of similar. Yeah. So first, I don't think I am great at managing people. Second, I sometimes fall into this mindset of pursuing the righteous path. What is the righteous path? It is like when you have a direction that can make money versus a direction that pushes a really interesting technology to its limit. I'd slam the accelerator and go right without hesitation, even though I know that is probably wrong. So I profoundly recognize the absolute need for someone who can effectively rein me in, someone capable of exerting a consistent, steadying influence and preventing me from veering drastically off course. I am talking about a specific individual who possesses the foresight and courage to intervene precisely at those critical moments when I am truly teetering on the precipice, about to go completely off the rails with an ill-advised decision or an overly impulsive action that could lead to significant problems. Yes, precisely, you understand. This profound and often humbling realization truly crystallizes after one has bravely navigated the often tumultuous, demanding, and exceptionally unpredictable journey of entrepreneurship. Through that intensely self-revealing and rigorous experience, you inevitably become not just superficially aware, but deeply and fully cognizant of your own inherent limitations, personal vulnerabilities, and various unavoidable shortcomings. So back then, I had a very clear idea. First, I didn't want to be CEO, didn't want to be the number one. Second, I wanted to find a canvas to explore. Note, I said canvas, not an already formed product to iterate on, because I felt like at that time, everyone was just placing bets. No one had a truly systematic method to figure out what AI products should do next. What do you mean everyone was placing bets? They were all making intuitive judgments, saying, I am going to build this, I'm going to build that. But having been through several startups already, I was thinking, could I do it more properly this time? Could we have a bit of data-driven thinking, like ByteDance? Yeah. So at that point, I felt I shouldn't just venture into the jungle alone again. One approach is doing things because I believe in them, but I should have a more structured process to observe more. So what is the best way to observe users? It is having an initial PMF, but on a very blank canvas. So back then with Xiaohong, of course, since he is from GenFund, and like our older generation of entrepreneurs who are now middle-aged id. So at that time, he wanted to build a product called Monica. Monica has many users now, and many of us are under the same entity. Monica is essentially a Chrome extension. I thought this product form really clicked with me. Why? First, it doesn't change any user habits. You are still in your browser, using familiar tools like Gmail. You are still watching YouTube. It doesn't disrupt your life just because AI is involved. So users' original patterns aren't forcibly altered. Your observation is unbiased. Second, back then, if you wanted to work on AI, you often had to commit to a specific direction early because you can't keep adding endless elements to one interface. Exactly right. Otherwise, product complexity rapidly skyrockets. I truly love this insightful saying from GitHub: everything added dilutes everything else. This means each new feature often dilutes the overall intrinsic value. The brilliance of a browser extension lies in its feature distribution being intelligently context-based. For example, video-related features and functionalities only appear when you are actively on YouTube, and functions like auto-writing or document editing only show up in places like Gmail or Google Docs. So it actually solves the complexity explosion from adding features. I think a browser extension is a fantastic window to observe how users actually interact with AI. It is not even a product form. It is an empty container, a blank canvas. So I believe this product is an ideal entry point into the era of AI applications. What did we observe? Some really interesting things I'll explain later. Why this matters for building products like Manus. This area felt very worthwhile, though I hadn't fully figured it out. There are other extensions, after all. So why partner with Xiaohong? Firstly, after an extensive discussion with him, I felt truly fortunate to recognize that he is perfectly suited for the demanding role of the Chief Executive Officer. More precisely, he remarkably excels in virtually every area where my own skills are noticeably underdeveloped. Furthermore, when one considers the broad landscape of artificial intelligence founders existing today, both domestically and across international borders, you'll find Xiaohong has a rare quality. He's normal. He's mentally sound, has no bad habits, no extreme ideologies. That is not just normal. It is actually rare these days. I feel many in this industry are quite obsessive or something. But honestly, it is like having Steve Jobs' attitude without his genius. Are you talking about yourself? Yeah. And after my own painful failures, I realized this, but they haven't yet. So I think Xiaohong's most valuable trait is his normality. He believes in common sense, right? Yeah, you put it well. He trusts common sense and the team, and his judgment on many things is more, you could say, data-driven or intuition-driven. But he is truly someone who can steadily guide a company from one stage to the next. If I were to start from scratch, I'd probably only enjoy the stage I like. So I think that is really rare. What details made you feel he was normal from the first meeting? I think it wasn't just the first time. How many times did you meet? Actually, many times, including having meals together 2 or 3 times later. And we talked for hours. So how did he convince me to join it? Came down to one line. He said, I know you've worked on browsers, search engines, and language models. Do you want to do all 3 again in one product? I considered the proposition, and indeed, I thought, sure, that sounds pretty appealing. The prospects seemed genuinely promising, offering a compelling vision for the future, one filled with potential growth. Consequently, without much hesitation, I committed and joined this endeavor. From the very outset, it became abundantly clear to everyone involved that this venture, while initially seeming centered around a key individual, was profoundly not just about Monica alone. While Monica serves as our crucial tuition fee, metaphorically speaking, acting as the company's primary cash cow, by consistently generating essential revenue that critically fuels our operations and development, we quickly understood the imperative for collective effort. We fundamentally had to come together and diligently build a robust and diverse team, a process that naturally included welcoming later vital additions such as Zhang Tao and a growing number of strategic partners, all contributing to our shared and expanding success.
To work on something entirely new, during your long talks and chats, what details made him seem so normal? I think it came from comparison because at that stage, I wasn't only talking to Xiaohong. Right. You met others too. Yes, exactly. How was he normal? I felt other founders were too much like artists, too artistic. Yeah, exactly. You are more of an artist yourself.
Right. If we're categorizing, I wouldn't call myself artistic. I don't deserve that term. Yeah. Too artistic. Other founders felt too artistic. Xiaohong is very grounded. Right. And even how our company operates now feels very steady. Sometimes we even reflect internally and think we might be a bit conservative. But that is what it means to our team. Indeed, it is profoundly about respecting common sense. I think you articulated that point quite exceptionally well. So who exactly are these artists? We can certainly bleep their names out for discretion, but there are, in fact, many of them. For instance, you are quite familiar with that particular product, right? Oh yes, I certainly know it. And you also know Diandian, don't you? I've personally met Diandian. And then, of course, there's always that other specific individual. And the one working on that, remember, oh, you've met them all. Yeah, people would come chat with me. And I just felt everyone was too artistic. Yeah. And not mentally healthy enough, kind of obsessive, like somewhat depressed, actually. Yeah. Xiaohong gets down sometimes too, but he's more quietly reflective sometimes. Yeah. But he is not depressed. Right. He is not depressed overall. He is pretty positive. Yeah. And not the type to have late night meltdowns or anything like that. So for entrepreneurs today, you don't think those are advantages anymore. I don't think they are. Definitely not. I feel this is a significant shift. Back in the mobile internet era, I actually quite liked that type of person because your marginal cost was very low. You could say, take a big gamble, go for something ambitious. and see if you could find a group of users who resonated with you, then gradually scale up. But in the AI industry today, we feel that while, of course, LM or inference costs are continuously dropping, we have this underlying sense that it is more like traditional manufacturing. There is always a fixed cost there. If you don't optimize anything, as your user base grows, your costs actually increase linearly. So the entire operational management capability required is much higher than in the previous mobile internet startup era. That is interesting. I think it is significantly higher. The mobile internet era favored artists, right? It liked artists. And you could actually acquire an initial batch of users at a very low cost. But AI, I don't think it is like that. AI isn't like that.
But you passed on that large model company from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Yes, I passed on basically all of them. But the reason for that stems entirely from PTSD. However, what people think is different in the AI era is that perhaps the large model and the product are integrated. So companies that own large models are more likely to build great products. That is their order along the way theory. You didn't buy into that from the start.
I do buy into that idea, but I think there is a timing issue. My current view is that maybe it won't take too long, perhaps in, say, 6 months. You won't really need to distinguish between so-called model companies and application companies anymore. Basically, every leading application company will have the capability to build models. This has already been demonstrated by Cursor. I think before there was this kind of unspoken, clear-cut separation. But look at Cursor, they've already stepped out, they released that new model. What is it called again? Composer 1, right? I think, first of all, building models or doing vertical integration primarily affects your initial iteration speed. That was the most painful lesson from my last startup. When you are uncertain, if you start with a bottom-up iteration approach, you'll be constrained by your model's iteration pace. Actually, this isn't just a startup problem. Even a powerhouse like OpenAI and I have immense respect for them. They've always highly valued this bottom-up approach, so they can generate a lot of new innovations. But if you look at it from a product elite perspective, in a way, you are buying a model lottery ticket. Because even if you have a decent roadmap, you don't really know if the model can deliver, if it can meet your imagined requirements until the very moment you finalize the postcard. So often, you are letting certain breakthroughs guide the product direction in reverse. I've already learned this lesson the hard way. That is point 1. Point 2 is what I just mentioned about models. Even if you can speed up iteration by optimizing your pipeline, adding more people, or making the whole chain smoother, as long as product managers exist in this world, you'll never quite catch up with the agility of a product manager's thinking.
So I think a healthier approach is once your product has achieved initial product market fit and reached a relatively stable state, then you consider building a model with the goal of increasing stability, reducing costs, or breaking through ceilings. It is a matter of sequence. You've been a CEO, and you've also been an observer of CEOs. You stay mentally healthy. Is that valuable for AI teams? Now, is it meaningful?
I think it is extremely valuable because you are very likely to face setbacks, or you inevitably will. But someone who is mentally healthy is resilient. You can humbly pick yourself up again and again, calmly observe external changes, and incorporate that feedback into your decision-making process. I've seen this countless times since joining Butterfly, our parent company. People don't adopt a brute force approach just because they're mentally unhealthy or have an excessive obsession. I think the overall mindset is very rational. From which month to which month did you talk before joining Manus, actually? It was quite a long gap. I can't remember clearly, but I think it was about 4 months in total. 4 months.
I remember the first time I met Xiaohong was downstairs at Beijing's Huanyuhui.
Mm.
He said he had just met you there. Was that where you agreed to join Manus possibly?
Wow.
This year has gone by so fast. I can't recall many details. I officially joined in March 2024. Joined early in the year. So the conversation started in late 2023. Yes, that is right. And around the same time, you also talked a lot about the applications being built. Then,
Yes.
not just applications we discussed, all 3 layers mentioned earlier. So are there any large model companies you liked for large models?
Well,
I passed on all of them.
At the time, the landscape probably looked more vibrant than it does now. Back then, I liked 2 companies. I am not being wise after the event. I think my judgment was decent, actually, 3 QW, DPC, and Kimi. DPC was also interesting because we had contact with them very early on. That is because my previous startup was working on intelligent complementary construction, and we built the entire search engine infrastructure from scratch. So we had a huge pre-training data set. That is how I got to know the folks at DPC early on. Later, I didn't sell the data to them separately. I just open sourced the data set we created, leaving a bit of a legacy for everyone. As for QWN, it was similar. I was quite familiar with many people on their team. At the time, I felt QWN was doing very solid work, and it was truly the first very permissively open source model. The level of respect I have for that is very high. Another point is that it showed me what a group of young people within a large company could achieve. I think that is extremely rare. And for Kimi, on one hand, it was also invested in by GenFund. I was at GenFund when they invested in Kimi. So there were quite a few exchanges. I think, first of all, that company is taste. Yes, that is very important. Is taste the right word? Well, people often use taste now. I might focus on a very specific metric. Sorry, shouldn't call it a metric. Can't put it that way. People often talk about taste. How is it embodied? Taste might be reflected in your evaluation or your internal benchmarks. I even think this might be the only moat for a startup. Sorry, not just startups, for any AI company because your internal measurement criteria, whether it is benchmarks for models or incentives for your people, ultimately determine the direction your company and product should take. So I think that is quite good. That point made me feel I shouldn't go to a large model company, but rather to an application company. Very few people.
Yes.
I think so. This is exactly what I meant by being particularly lucky. I faced a lot of setbacks early on that others encountered later. Yes. Have they started eating yet today? I think many people already have. And they've learned some pretty tough lessons. For example, many of those domestic large model companies that were talked about before it started with what they called the 100 models war, right? Well, about 99 of those have already died out. Even the few most talked about ones are gradually exiting the race. That is pretty normal. And actually, since DPO came out, it has had a huge objective impact on everyone. It has drastically shortened a model shelf life. You know, what is the most painful part about large models? Now, if my old pain came from vertical integration and rapid iteration, now it has become this. If you are only doing models and you are not soda, it is meaningless. But a soda model's shelf life is really only about 1 to 1.5 months. It is an intensely competitive state. You either advance or fall behind. And with large models, like I mentioned earlier, back when we worked on NLP, there were many different tracks you could take. Like I do information extraction, you do something else, and your so-called good metric could vary. But with LMS or next token prediction models, they've essentially unified the modeling of all sorts of tasks. Even though people say they'll focus on coding or dynamics, the dimensions for measurable metrics in the world are actually very, very clear. There is almost no wiggle room. The slightly nicer thing about building products is that you can at least define what good means yourself. So you can at least compete in a differentiated space. You have more room to maneuver. Is pursuing soda still valuable today? I absolutely think it is. Whether it is a model company or even an agent company, I believe they should all pursue soda. That is a must. Because as mentioned earlier, your evaluation or the benchmarks you choose to focus on determine whether your taste can be realized. If you dismiss these large model companies from day one, what do you think their future looks like? Well, I think it is like this. Large model companies will inevitably become companies that both develop models and build applications. Look at the landscape in the US now. It is already heading in that direction. OpenAI, I think, is more like two companies now. A model company is strongly associated but not strictly bound research lab. Google has always been strong in both areas. And in particular, and they might have been more focused before on being a B2B market, like offering their Claude API. But the huge success of Claude Code has given them a lot of positive reinforcement. Since Mike Krieger, the former Instagram co-founder, joined as their CPO, they've really polished their products. Well, and Mike Krieger isn't just working on what we broadly think of as user-facing products. He also has excellent control over many developer-facing products. For example, things like Claude Scale have received high praise. That is also a product capability. So yeah, I think everyone will eventually go down this path. Conversely, if we eventually stop distinguishing between large model companies and application companies, then I believe creating a good, beloved application is much harder than creating a sufficiently good model. Because knowledge about training models circulates extremely quickly within the industry. Especially in Silicon Valley, there are no secrets. A husband might work at OpenAI, his wife at Google. You know how it is. Information flows freely.
So I think in the end, it'll become a battle of applications, with each application tied to some models. So the line between model companies and application companies won't be so clear cut. Yeah, I don't think it'll be that distinct. You mentioned earlier that you talked to some overseas companies back then, including Google. Who else did you talk to? And what was your take on them? That was in 2023.
Right.
2023.
Yes.
Actually, back then, I talked to almost every company working on models. I even recorded a podcast in early 2023, still under my role at GenFund, and made some bold claims. Luckily, they've all turned out to be pretty accurate. So back then, I focused on a few key points. And this is all on record. I am not being wise after the fact. First, in early 2023, I said I was paying attention to long context, though. I'll admit, I think that was a miss. Second, I was quite focused on the boundary between natural language and systems. You could call it function calling or interaction with the environment. Basically what we now call agents. That was a key point for me. Third, which I didn't mention in that talk, but I've always believed in scaling up. That is the often mentioned bitter lesson in AI. Historically, progress has mostly come from general methods plus more computing power, not from injecting more human expert knowledge. So regarding scaling, I was very optimistic back then and bought NVIDIA stock early on. Wait, whose stock? NVDA. Yes. And I always felt Google would eventually become really strong, but it did take them quite a while. You joined Manus in March 2024. What were you doing up until October 2024, actually? I am not sure if Xiaohong has shared this before, why he asked me to join. And what convinced me, he said, do you want to do the browser, search engine, and large model thing all over again? Because at the time, I think we all made a misjudgment. Monica already had a decent user base, and we thought we might be the team in the world that best understood how users use AI in the browser. So our intuitive, habitual extrapolation was, should we build a browser? This idea was somewhat data-driven looking at it, rationally, since Monica was already cash flow positive and growing well. But there is something interesting. If you look at the Chrome Web Store, you can see the activity and download counts for all other products. It is a very transparent ecosystem. Back then, the top two in the entire extension ecosystem were AdBlock for removing ads and Grammarly for grammar correction. They've been around for years, right? Their products are absolutely polished. No issues, but they plateaued at around 50 million users. 50 million is huge for a startup, but compared to Chrome's overall daily active users, I think Chrome has around 2 billion DAU. If I remember correctly, I might be off since I didn't prepare the exact numbers, but we felt that even at best, we might only reach less than one of Chrome users because extensions are a relatively high friction format. Many average users don't even know Chrome can install extensions. So our first thought was maybe we're constrained by the extension format itself. We were pretty naive back then. We wondered if we could break out of the extension mold and become a standalone, native browser on users' computers. That way, we could also do other things. Like on-device models, though, that turned out to be a bit of a pitfall, which we'll get to later. So we started building the browser, and everyone was excited. Right after I joined, we hit the ground running. From April to around September, we worked really fast and actually had a usable browser product internally quite early on. So after we did some internal digging, we realized there was a problem with this.
Yeah.
What was the problem, right? And the funny thing about this issue is it was something we actually built back then. Was Zhang Tao part of the team at that time? He joined. What month was that? I joined in April, and brother Dao joined a month or two after that. Hey, why don't you introduce your little group here? Because everyone gets you guys mixed up. Yeah, I think this is a fantastic thing. Why? Let me start with a joke first. Why do I think it is great not to be the CEO? Because even though I am the one who appears in most of Manus's promotional videos, why are you the one in them? Because you have to speak English, right? And then naturally, some people support it and some people criticize it, right? They see students criticizing it. Yeah, Xiaohong is taking all the heat from me. So thanks to Xiaohong for taking a lot of the bullets for me. Okay, so here's the deal for the entire MAS team, or the Butterfly Project. This company actually has 6 partners. Really? I didn't know that? Yeah. Actually, the one you might see out in public more often is Zhang Tao, our CPU. He handles a lot of things, whether it is product or actually even more like external communications, including presentations and that kind of stuff. That is Zhang Tao. Before this, Zhang Tao was also a very, very senior serial entrepreneur. What has he been through? Wandujia, sensor data, and later on he worked at Guanglin, among other places. So he's in charge of product. Yeah. He handles product and all these external partnerships. Then there is Xiaohong Red, and he is our CEO. And then there is our CTO, Pan, and our CMO, Huiji. Those 3 have actually been starting businesses together for a while now. They've done 2 or 3 companies already. They are the original founders of Monica, those 3. Yeah. And then besides them, there is me and our CEO, CC. She has always been responsible for like company operations, finance-related matters, and so on. So actually, we have 6 colleagues who are partners. Right, so startup teams are getting bigger these days. Is that true? Yeah, it is not so much about needing more skills, but more complementary ones. I think it is actually like this first, there might be this external viewpoint now, saying that in the AI era, teams will become smaller. We think that, first of all, you shouldn't treat that as a target metric, or rather it should be a passive indicator. We would absolutely not do any special optimization, just for the sake of team size. We only naturally observe how the team size changes. But I do think, as you said, there is one point. Nowadays, it's really hard to separate different skill sets because it is difficult to make them completely orthogonal. Like, for example, in the AI agent industry we're in, your research and engineering are deeply coupled, and product is also simultaneously guiding how the system architecture should be built. So indeed, all 6 of us are basically serial entrepreneurs. And previously, everyone has probably taken on more than one role. Yeah. So I think that is also a point that makes our collaboration work well. But at the same time, it is also quite rare to find people who are deeply skilled in their own fields, yet are still open to listening to others. I'd say we are a very rare team because all 6 of us are mentally and physically healthy, have no bad habits, and our views aren't extreme. What kind of bad habits are you talking about? I am just kidding. At the very least, we don't really smoke or drink. What is your decision-making mechanism? Like, I think this is something we've been continuously improving. I think for a startup at different stages, or when you are tackling different things, you need different decision-making models. We believe that even though we are serial entrepreneurs, we are still not fully mature, and we are gradually moving towards a more rational approach. We might summarize it this way. You need to divide your management into several different types. One is autocratic, or there's an English term called BDFL, which stands for benevolent dictator for life, a benevolent lifelong dictator. That is the centralized authoritarian style. Then there's the democratic style. We think if you divide the entire process into 3 stages, you could call it GPAG, is for go, you set the goal. Then P is for setting the priority, and A is for alternatives, having different options. When deciding on these 3 things, you should use different modes. When setting the goal, you should be more autocratic. That means perhaps Red, as the CEO, should firmly set the team's target. When deciding on the priority, it should be a mix of autocratic and democratic decision-making. Like, sure, first, there needs to be someone who can make the final call, but everyone can fully express their opinions because this involves more different areas of expertise and such. And when everyone is providing alternatives options, it should be fully democratic. Because at this stage, we think the number of viable options might even be more important than their quality. Often, If you don't have enough options, your decision space is inherently suboptimal. It is like training a model, but if your action space itself is flawed, what are you even choosing from, right? So I think it is a hybrid model, but I think we're still very amateur at this and are constantly learning. Are there things that Xiaohong makes the final call on, things where he personally decides, yes, I think Xiaohong is still the ultimate decision maker on product-related matters. We think this is a very important point, something even I strongly believe in, rather than leaving things hanging. It is better to just try it out quickly, because often when we're in a new field, first, your past experience might not be useful. And second, thinking more about it doesn't give you additional information.
Right.
You are still just working with the parametric knowledge inside your model. You are not doing RAG, right? You don't have a test result. So instead of overthinking, you might as well just do it, get your reward, and then iterate. So this has always been a core guiding principle for us. So the difference between him being CEO and you being CEO might be that you are more tech driven and he is more product driven.
Right.
And that would make your company's DNA product driven.
Yes.
Yes. But I really respect Xiaohong, and he also fully respects me. For example, when it comes to technical roles, I can be the BDFL in the tech domain. I can be the dictator on technical matters, and that is fine too. So overall, is it top down or bottom up? I think we are gradually trying to shift from a top down system to a bottom up one as much as possible, because as the team expands and the quality of team members keeps improving, we feel bottom up will have greater momentum. Before, like when we were in a purely fast-paced phase, top-down might have been a more stable approach. But now we're gradually becoming more mature. We were just talking about what you were doing from April to October. Oh, right, sorry, I've gone way off track. Back then we actually did a lot of things, but the central theme was how to build an AI native browser.
Yeah.
The product form we came up with back then was actually quite similar to what HP Atlas and that dial look like now. At the time we had a few ideas for the entry point. That is, we wanted to train an on-device model to allow certain operations to be completed on the user's computer, avoiding API costs while also fully respecting user privacy. This is where we dug our first very silly pit. Come on, you are building a browser. Browsers are inherently connected to the internet. Why are you chasing this offline on-device operation? Looking back now, it seems a bit silly. Second, most users don't really care whether you are offline or not, they just want the best results. Back then, even if you were just running a model on Apple Silicon chips on a computer, you're pretty much maxed out at around 3B parameters. Users would compare you to the flagship cloud models, and your performance would inevitably fall short. Thinking back, that first point now seems pretty laughable. The second point, which many people are still pursuing today, is trying to have AI take over the user's browser to automate workflows. We tried that too. But here's the thing, why did it feel off? Let me elaborate. We identified a few key issues. First, if you let AI take control of a user's computer, the experience gets really weird. For example, if I ask AI to fill out a form on a web page, and after it fills one field, I scroll down to check something else, I've essentially broken the AI's observation loop. That is related to how an agent operates, which I can explain later. The agent might then pull the web page back up. That experience is just strange. It is like having a super smart intern, but you are forced to share a single computer with them. It feels odd, like two people fighting over one system. The truth is, all our current operating systems and software are fundamentally designed for one person at a time. So the experience just doesn't work. Second, we started asking what tasks actually provide real value to action. A lot of people are working on so-called viewer agents, automated agents that control the user interface. You quickly realize that if you ask it to do something you could accomplish with just a few clicks, it feels like a waste. Your own quick decisions are often faster than the AI's. Even for a simple task like ordering takeout, between each step, the AI might take 5 or 10 seconds to reason, though it is faster now, but you end up thinking, this isn't adding much value, right? I could do it quicker myself. That is a common reaction. Real value lies in long horizon task complex jobs that are broad in scope, maybe beyond my own capability, or that require a long runtime, where multiple steps are almost inevitable. Those are the tasks I don't want to do myself, the ones I'd want to hand off to an AI. But here's another problem. If you are building a native AI browser, the AI is running directly on your computer. I'm not talking about the model being local, but the AI continuously operating your machine. That gets awkward. I can't just close my laptop lid. If I close it, the computer goes to sleep or freezes. So how do I let the AI run a long trial task while I have to keep watching to make sure my computer doesn't sleep and I can't really do other work either? Both of these experiences felt really odd to us. Of course, that was just a vague sense of unease. The bigger issue was that our team couldn't answer a core question. What can this native AI browser do that our current setup Chrome plus Monica can't? And honestly, after thinking it over, the answer seemed to be not much. That is when we started getting more rational. This process is crucial after building a product. You naturally want to convince yourself it is great. Even as serial entrepreneurs, we still have that bias. You've just built something, so you are inclined to be a little partial to it. But as more problems surface, you start making cooler, more objective judgments. The more we thought, the more we felt this wasn't right. Looking at browser shifts in human history, there have only been a couple once from Netscape to IE. And then from IE to Chrome, the root cause of those changes was distribution, how you get the product to users. IE came pre-installed, while Chrome's case was a bit more complex. Google had become the default homepage for many, and IE was facing serious technical and security issues, a perfect historical opportunity. But now, with Chrome working perfectly fine and excellent extensions, like Monica available, how motivated are users to switch to a whole new browser just for AI? We started wrestling with that question, but hadn't made a final decision yet. Then, luck struck again. One day we were browsing Twitter and saw that an innovative US startup we deeply respect, the browser company, creators of the unique Arc browser, a browser some of you might have encountered and possibly used. It is notably known for its distinctive and appealing design, later augmented by a range of AI-driven features, and has become popular among a specific discerning niche of the geek crowd, for instance. They were the pioneers of that unique vertical tab sidebar. Their founder, Josh Miller, suddenly announced he was discontinuing their AI agent, Arc Boosts. It was a big move. His reason instantly resonated with us. He said something like, "After all this time building Arc, I still can't convince my own friends and family to switch from Chrome." So we thought, well, he just spelled out our exact concern in black and white. It made us realize that maybe browsers just aren't the right space for a startup to try and disrupt. You've built a browser twice, right? Yeah, this was my second browser attempt, and we reached the same conclusion. Of course, I hadn't thought about it as systematically back then. I was just charging ahead based on passion. This time, we thought it through very rationally and realized it didn't feel right. But we were also lucky to spot some early signs. When did we stop the project? I joined in April 2024. And the browser was functional by August. But through August, September, and almost into October, we were still feeling uncertain.
So we officially pulled the plug around late September. Our lead had sensed the browser idea was off, but was hesitant to tell the team, partly because he'd recruited everyone with the browser vision, especially you. Me and Jiang Tao, I'd say.
Right.
Exactly. He probably felt that way.
That is one of his strengths. He's very considerate of everyone's feelings and doesn't just solve problems like an artist might. Looking back, that period was actually incredibly valuable. We naturally reached a consensus, gradually letting go of the browser idea, and entered a phase of almost having nothing to do. When a group of fairly smart people have nothing to do, a lot of great ideas start bubbling up. So how did you all reach that consensus to drop the browser? Did he come to you about it? Actually, I think everyone started sensing something was off beforehand. A key moment is when you've polished a product and suddenly think, this isn't really cool. If I were advising someone today, I'd say, if you finish a product and don't think it is cool, don't launch it. If you don't think it is cool, no one else will. Not particularly cool. That is such an artistic way to put it.
Yeah.
It is very artistic because in that moment, I am putting myself in the user's shoes. If the person who should love this product the most, don't even like it.
How can you expect users to, right? I am not saying this as a decision maker. I am thinking from a user's perspective. In a new era, is simply redoing a product from the previous era a good startup strategy?
I don't think we can make a blanket statement about this. First, there is a quote I really like: for every complex problem, there is an answer that is simple, clear, and wrong. I feel like we often tend to overgeneralize things, right? So I can't just split this issue into a simple yes or no, but it is definitely something to be cautious about, because a lot of times people choose this approach out of mental laziness. You might look at what worked in a past era and think you can just recreate it with new technology, but you have to consider how the external environment has changed.
So I don't think it is that black and white. Our team decided to step back from the AI browser project, but other teams are still exploring it. What do you think the future of AI browsers looks like? I can't speak for other browsers. And just because we moved on doesn't necessarily mean it was the wrong path. Our team reached a consensus that
The potential payoff for building this wasn't very clear if we had taken a different mindset, like this product isn't super exciting, but since we've already built it, let's just launch it and see that could pull you into a tough situation. Once you release a product, a responsible team has to keep maintaining it. That comes with a significant opportunity cost. You could get stuck in a cycle of constantly justifying your work and miss out on new, more valuable opportunities. Now, if another team has already developed an AI browser they're happy with, then entering that cycle might make sense for them. You might start with what is called an AI browser, but as you follow that path, you could evolve into a completely different kind of product, who knows? So I can't make that decision for others.
So Xiaohong convinced you to join by saying you completely rebuild the browser, search engine, and language model within one product. Then by September or October 2024, you decided to drop the browser project. Were you conflicted? What were you really thinking? Did you feel misled, honestly? No, like I mentioned earlier.
That line was just the final push that convinced me to join. I wouldn't join a project based on just one sentence, right? What I truly value is that through Monica, we genuinely got a foothold in the practical AI application space. That is crucial. Monica's significance as a product is immense. First, it is a product with positive cash flow. I'll probably say that a lot: positive cash flow. When a team has a product generating positive cash flow, it makes decisions about the next big thing much more rationally. You can be both bold and sensible. The reason we later dared to take big bets is because we knew Monica was consistently bringing in revenue, allowing us to make decisions that are both objective and ambitious. Second, Monica really showed us how users interact with AI and helped us understand the importance of context. What really sets Monica apart from a typical chatbot is this: if you are using a chatbot, you have to copy and paste the content from a web page into the chat window Monica. On the other hand, proactively observes your context. As long as you are using the browser, the extension is there, making context transfer seamless. That was a huge insight for us. More concretely, it helped us understand users' overall behavior patterns. Of course, we deeply respect user privacy. We don't peek at your specific content, but through aggregated, anonymized data, you can identify a lot of patterns.
Why do all these products start with M, even your previous company?
Yeah.
That is funny. My first product was called Mammoth Browser, starts with M. The second was Maggie, starts with M. Then Monica starts with M. And so does Mattis. It is totally a coincidence. Maybe products starting with M. Just have good luck.
Of course, Malice might have a bit of a personal stake in this, since I was the one who came up with the name. How did we land on this name? Well, we actually debated a lot of names back then, but what really helped us decide was figuring out what we truly wanted to do. At that time, working on the browser, we had a vague sense that models were tackling intelligence. But no matter how powerful the intelligence is, you can't internalize the environment, so you definitely need a hand to reach into the real world. Otherwise, no matter how sharp your thinking is, you are just a theoretical physicist, or even what you might call a brain in a vat. So what we wanted was to let intelligence truly touch the real world. That reminded me of MIT's motto, mens at manus, which is Latin and translates to mind and hand. We felt others had already explored the mind or intellect quite deeply. All the AI models and company missions were focused there, while what we wanted to do was be that hand. And Malice actually means hand in Latin.
Tell us how the idea for Minds came about during that laid back, seemingly idle period.
Right.
That is actually what happened around October, right?
Yeah.
It was a gradual process. I think it was another case of luck shining on us at the time. We were still running Monica normally while also experimenting with other things. But we noticed that during that phase, some AI products were gaining popularity, especially in coding like Cursor, Windsurf, and later ones. Devin actually had a lot of users. And as engineers, of course, we use them, right? Then we discovered, surprisingly, that people in our company and many non-engineers were using Cursor too. That was unexpected because Cursor's product form is still an IDE, an integrated development environment, something meant for coders. But we found, for example, our operations colleague using Cursor to write blog posts, and our data analysis colleague using it for data analysis and visualization. That really surprised us because it is a highly professional platform, yet many users weren't its original target audience. So we'd stand behind them and observe how exactly are you using and targeted. Cursor, it is interesting because on the left is code, and on the right is the chat window with AI. Many of these colleagues don't know how to code. They don't even look at the left side. They just keep chatting with the AI, getting it to complete tasks. The AI uses programming, with code as the medium to handle non-coding tasks. We thought this was a crucial insight, making us realize that programming isn't just a vertical skill. It is actually a universal ability, a medium for solving general tasks. Then we thought the Cursor format isn't optimal for them. A few reasons. One thing we learned from our browser experiment is that it shouldn't run on your local machine. Otherwise, it can't free up your task. Attention during tasks, right? People always say attention is all you need, but we wanted to free the user's attention, letting the agent run in the cloud, executing tasks asynchronously. Asynchronicity also brings another benefit, concurrency. If you can run many different tasks simultaneously, that is what truly multiplies your efficiency. So that is point one. We believed a product like Cursor should adopt a different form and run in the cloud. Second, code should be a tool, not the main interface. Because for many people, seeing code creates a natural tension, right? Especially when it is running on your computer cursor, often asks for permissions, like I want to install this software, or can I delete this file for many users? If you don't understand the technical terms, your only choice is to just accept. That is scary. We have a friend who used Cursor without technical knowledge, just messing around. And Cursor ended up uninstalling his network driver, so his computer couldn't connect to the internet. So we thought, no, we should use the same technology, but wrap up the technical complexity. Third, who is this product for? It shouldn't be just professional engineers. That field is almost saturated. It is a major lane. We should target users, what we call prosumers, or all knowledge workers who aren't programmers. So we felt we should change the product form. Luckily, we had a lot of technical delay from working on the browser, like deep familiarity with the Chromium kernel, and we built our own scheduling system, AJText. So for us, this didn't seem too difficult. What we needed was to move the whole AI browser concept to the cloud. So we started an internal project, and I randomly came up with a code name, Airbnb, which stood for browser and browser in the air, meaning a browser running within a browser, and it is in the cloud.
Yeah.
So we were fortunate not to waste the technical delay from our browser work. Starting from late September, October, we officially got to work. And in about 6 months, we had Minds built. Actually, Minds wasn't finished in March. It was done by January. When did we start? We started around late September. And by mid-January 2025, Minds was basically complete. But I decided we shouldn't launch right away. Why? Because at the time, the best model we could access was Claude 3.5, Sonnet v2, the second iteration of Claude 3.5. It had some initial agentic capabilities, but it had issues from a technical perspective. It lacked true reasoning ability. Also, I'd heard rumors that there would be a new model release in about 2 months. I didn't know how good it would ultimately be, but I thought we should align our launch with the next model iteration. That way, our product launch could benefit from the biggest generational leap the models each will effect, model each will. So we figured we should spend another month and a half polishing the product, then launch it aligned with the next model iteration. So The time from abandoning the browser project to coming up with the Minds idea was pretty shorty. You could describe it as quite short, but not excessively brief. I believe the truly unproductive idle period lasted about 2.5 weeks. Was it really that short?
Yes.
Remarkably short. Actually, that period wasn't truly idle. Instead, we were very actively running various experiments. Were you anxious during that time? Not at all. Absolutely. That is why having a product with consistent positive cash flow is fundamentally important. Our thinking at the time was, let's brainstorm. Even if we burn some money, how much did you burn on the browser? The browser was.
Okay.
We invested. Maybe a dozen people.
Yeah.
And besides manpower, there weren't many other costs. How much revenue was Monica generating for you back then after Nels launched? We actually scaled back our investment in Monica a bit, though we've probably ramped it up again recently. But at that time, Monica was already bringing in close to 12 million. That is 12 million USD. And it was a profitable product. Well, but compared to Manus now, 12 million in ARR isn't really a big deal. But for an AAR product at that stage, I think it was a fantastic achievement. Was that external AR? Oh, definitely not external AR. We place a lot of importance on that. We always emphasize what AR really is. AR is MRR multiplied by 12. What is MRR? You can't just take all the annual subscriptions you got in one month and count them for that single month. You have to spread that revenue across each month. So internally, when we look at ARR, AMRR, MRR, we stick to one consistent method. We look at the MRR data Stripe gives us and the MRR data from our mobile apps. Otherwise, there are too many ways to artificially inflate that MRR number. But that is just fooling yourself. And like I mentioned earlier, this also serves as a kind of benchmark, right, for a product. This is a metric you'd want to optimize. For a model, you choose a benchmark to guide your optimization. Both of these things together shape your taste. So I think this is a really crucial point. We're very much against the idea of vanity era. How much error does Manus have now? Oh, it has already surpassed 100 million USD. Here's the thing. We used to have a more complex pricing model. Besides subscriptions, users could also do top-ups. That means you could add extra funds for one-time purchases. We thought that gave users a lot of flexibility. But honestly, it also caused them a lot of confusion. So we've been working hard to simplify our pricing plans right now. It is pretty straightforward. You can think of it as having a free plan and a subscription plan where you can choose your own monthly amount with a default of 40 per month. Since you joined the company from March to September, have your feelings about it changed over these 6 months?
Yeah.
I think there have been some changes. First off, it is very different from the startup environment I was in before. Previously, the pace was much slower and more cautious. Whenever you had to make a technical decision or place a bet on technology, you had to be very careful. But if you are a company that is completely product driven, you'll find the overall pace is much, much faster. To be honest, I had some trouble adjusting at first. I wondered why so many things felt rushed. Why is product development faster? Well, product development has to be faster. For one, the cost of iteration is lower. Like we talked about, you don't have the issue of vertically integrating a model. Secondly, if everything follows agile development, you often adopt a ship it first, see if there are problems, then fix it mentality. But if you've ever fine-tuned a model yourself, you know that when you are cleaning data, you really shouldn't let an AI write that code. Because once you've prepped that data and hit enter, you might be launching a training run that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. The level of psychological pressure is completely different. When you are working on technical or model-related tasks, a lot of what you do has long-term consequences. Once you do something, it is very hard to easily correct or roll back. It can leave issues in the system's history. But with product work, you can pivot very quickly. So I think this team does a great job of embracing that. And it probably took me a month or two to really get used to it.
A lot of researchers or people with a strong technical background don't like this approach. They might think the technical culture is poor, that it is too fast, that there is no real technical bet. Didn't you have that problem? Here's how I see it. Having a technical bet sounds like a great thing. If you are a hard tech company, you should make those bets because that might be your ultimate source of differentiation.
But first, if you are a product company, then you shouldn't really have the concept of a heavy bet, or you should only make lightweight, reversible bets. You know how people talk about two-way door decisions versus one-way door decisions. If you are a product company and you are still constantly worrying about whether to make a big technical bet, I think you are in a bit of a conflicted state.
Yeah.
That needs some adjustment. So you guys don't have any bets, let me put it this way. Any bets we make aren't that heavy. No major technical bets. Well, we do have technical bets, but none of them are the kind where, for example, I need 2 months to see the results of the next pre-training run. And only after it is done can I decide what to do next. There is no the fate of the empire rests on this single battle kind of drama. For some model companies, though, I think you do need to have some of those big bets. That is what I see as the difference between the two mindsets. So what are your bets then, product form? A product form, actually, you could say that deciding not to train our own model from the start was also a bet. Because when we made that decision, maybe now people are gradually coming around to it, partly because I've been advocating for it everywhere. But back then, a lot of people weren't very optimistic about the whole idea of context engineering, especially when we started talking about the shell. Yeah, I really like the term shell because linguistically, you can think of it like the operating system concept of a shell. A shell is not a low-tech thing, and there are high-quality shells and low-quality shells. Let me give you an analogy. If Monica is clearly just a wrapper, it is like sashimi. The quality of sashimi depends almost entirely on the raw ingredient, how good the fish is that you pull from the ocean. You're giving it to the user with almost no processing. So the value you add is very shallow, but something like Manus, it is still a shell, but it is not sashimi. Maybe it is more like Sichuan boiled fish or something. I haven't eaten it because I am allergic to seafood, so I wouldn't know. It is not necessarily a simple thing. What is the biggest difference between an agent and a chatbot in a chatbot system? There are only two elements: the person, the user, and the model you interact back and forth between the two. But an agent has a third element, the environment or the runtime. That is actually a very significant component. So the shell for an agent compared to a chatbot isn't just a different thickness. It is like the Earth's crust thick. So what was the hardest part about building Manus, summarizing Manus? There are several very difficult points. The first is the earlier you start, the harder it is. First, being able to believe that something like Manus could even be built that is what I think was the first major challenge. What was the first idea? The first idea, it was really about taking browser automation to the next level. Was that your idea? I think that is a point everyone could see. Like I said earlier, we all discussed it together. But I think after we saw Cursor helped clarify a lot of things for us. So we've always had a lot of respect and admiration for Cursor as a company. They gave us a lot of ideas. And I think that is the first point. A lot of people say building the atomic bomb wasn't the hardest part. Knowing that an atomic bomb could be built was the hardest part. Back then, we were essentially defining the term general purpose agent. At that time, we felt that first, we had to believe that NELs could be built. That in itself was a bet. Yeah, because it required not exactly betting the whole company. We didn't have that many people on the project back then. Of course, it was very small at the start. We began with 5 people running experiments. And every time we saw a promising sign, we'd pull more people from the Monica team to join. So how many people were operating Monica back then? The Monica team probably had a few dozen people, a few dozen. And you guys had 5. Yeah, that was the size of the company. Right. And we were split between 2 locations at the time. Me and Daoji were in Beijing, while Xiaohong and the main Monica team were in Wuhan. So back then, the Beijing side was basically like an innovation business unit searching for the second growth curve, right? Searching for the second curve. So it was a process of gradual scaling. You see, that is also a pretty rational approach, right? Not like, oh, forget the old stuff. Let's all go work on the new thing. Yeah, we did it step by step. I think that was the first bet, believing that a product like Manus could actually be built. So that was the first bet. Now, the second point, after we actually started, we did hesitate for a bit. The question was whether we should dive into building our own model, because the foundational models available back then were honestly pretty rough. Take GPT 3.5, for example. Maybe it was a milestone. We're looking at it with today's standards. Its stability, reliability, and generalization were still lacking a lot. And even today, there's a problem many models haven't solved. How do I put it? I think most models are still fine-tuned primarily for chat scenarios. There is also this issue of interpretability, which we might touch on later. So back then, we faced a real challenge. The question was, should we try to make up for these model shortcomings by building our own? But I felt we were in a phase of rapid technological advancement. You could see how much progress there was between GPT 3.5 V1 and V2. So I thought we shouldn't bet on that direction. Instead, we should place a lighter bet on something else back then. The term prompt engineering didn't even exist. We should firmly believe that working on an AI agent framework could bring significant improvements. Yeah, that was the second bet we made at the time. So what was the third bet? Well, we saw Coursera achieving great success. And a lot of people probably had the thought, should we do something similar to Coursera? But for us, the idea of making a Chinese version of Coursera, and many might be doing that now, just didn't sit right with me. I've always been pretty firm on this, probably because the positive feedback I've gotten from entrepreneurship has always come from innovation. So I think it is actually a good thing. We should do something differentiated and serve those prosumers well, instead of just jumping into the same crowded space. Yeah, so those were the 3 key decisions back then. Luckily, they all seem to have been the right calls. People often talk about what not to do. And yeah, I agree. I think spending a long time deciding what not to do is really crucial. With AI, one of the biggest things is that it massively increases a startup's capacity. In the past, like during the mobile internet era, maybe we didn't have the freedom to think about what not to do. If you were in a certain field and wanted to start something new, you faced a lot of constraints. External factors would rein in those overly wild ideas. But in the AI era, it feels like there are endless opportunities, and AI has fully unleashed productivities. So I think every day we have to answer the question, what are we not going to do? Even now, I feel our product is relatively restrained. Some other agent companies might think about adding lots of different tools, giving the AI or agent more capabilities. But we're thinking every month about what we can remove. So what not to do remains a constant question for us. Even for a general purpose agent is less an important point. Back then, we didn't try to make a Chinese version of someone else. There wasn't a direct benchmark for us.
Yeah.
In my own entrepreneurial journeys, I've never really thought about copying someone else. Why did you decide to build a general purpose agent? That is actually a great question. According to traditional startup wisdom,
you should probably pick a niche market.
Or dive deep into a vertical. That might be the more conventional approach. But I have a few observations from different angles, considering both technology and product form. First, on the technology side, in my last startup, I experienced what it is like for a specialized model to get overshadowed by a large general model. So within the current tech framework, even if you are building a vertical agent, what are you using underneath it? It's still a general foundation model. You can do some specialization, but you might run into model exploration issues. We can talk about that later. On the other hand, what is our agent essentially? It is a general model plus a computer. because every session, every conversation runs in a separate, isolated virtual machine, a sandbox. The technical term for this is a Turing machine, Turing completeness. Theoretically, it can simulate or run any algorithm. So right away, we see that the two core technical components of our agent are general purpose. Going vertical would just mean adding constraints on top. That is the first technical judgment. Second, from the start, just like with Monica, we didn't make a huge bet on a specific use case. Instead, we adopted a more Darwinian mindset to observe. If we provide users with a general technical framework, what is our advantage? Users can use the product according to their imagination. At the same time, as the creators, our mission is to observe the collective behavior patterns of our users, identify the top scenarios, and then have our product team optimize the last mile. When we first launched, in our promotions and all the case studies on our webpage, we showcased all sorts of different use cases from all over. We didn't want to guide users up front on how to use it. Gradually, we noticed users really like making slides, creating PPTs, building web pages, and now doing batch file processing. We realized, these are areas where our product team could step in for some targeted optimization. So our agent is a product completely shaped by users, while still retaining strong general capabilities. And these general capabilities lead to my second point on the product side. I believe many features will eventually converge. For example, deep research was a relatively new concept back then. But now, look, almost all major products have some form of deep research capability. Gemini has it. Of course, there are still differences, but the capability is becoming standard across products. This reminds me of an experience from working on social products. Or put it this way, why use Google instead of Bing if you only search for the most common queries? You'll find the first page results from any major search engine are pretty similar in quality. So why still use Google in quality? Because Google consistently delivers pleasant surprises with your long-tail queries. What problem does this solve? If you can satisfy those long-tail users, they're more likely to have what we call an aha moment, the feeling that only this product can solve their specific problem. Let me give an example. There was a molecular biologist who used our agent and was really amazed. He wanted to use the deep research feature, but his experimental instrument exported data in a very niche format. He couldn't do this with other products. When he uploaded the file to our agent, it said, this is an unusual file format. Let me look into it. After researching, the agent went to GitHub, downloaded an open source project to parse the data format, and then completed the analysis. So for these long-tail, underserved scenarios, having a general purpose product that can handle them gives users immense satisfaction. And long-tail doesn't mean low frequency for that individual. It is part of their daily work. So for a single person, it is a recurring, ongoing task. That is the second point on the product side. The third point addresses a frequency issue. If you build a vertical agent, it is actually quite hard to establish a strong mindshare with users. Honestly, if it is for a tool like a to-do app. That is, different people use those daily. But think about every hackathon. There is always a team building a travel planning agent. For the average person, planning a trip might only happen 2, 3, maybe 4 times a year. The frequency is just too low to make users remember you, right? If you are a general purpose product, you actually have a higher chance of serving users in every aspect. That way, you can achieve better engagement frequency. But at the same time, building a general purpose AI agent involves choosing different technical approaches. For example, some products might aim to be general purpose, but in reality, they might just bundle different features under the same interface. Essentially, there are multiple products sharing just one domain name. One thing we at Manus are extremely committed to is that Manus is a single, unified agent framework. So when users perform different tasks within Manus, their context and memory can flow freely. What this allows us to do compared to vertical, specialized tools is that we can always take one extra step. Let me give you an example. There are actually many AI agents out there that can build web pages, or what we call website builders. For AI, creating a visually appealing web page is that hard. The real challenge is making sure the content on that page is accurate and reliable. That S where Manus comes in. It can first conduct deep research, then use that research to actually build the web page. And at the same time, this web page comes with a real functional backend and a database for users. If the user shares their web page online and more people start using it, Manus can continue within the same session to analyze the web page S traffic, even help create a style guide or a PowerPoint presentation, and email it to you, maybe even to your investors. So what Manus really does is take every vertical scenario and add that extra step, creating an internal network effect along the way. I think that as a key advantage of being a general purpose tool, where are its limits? I believe the boundaries depend on several dimensions. First, as mentioned earlier, an agent system consists of 3 elements: the user, the environment, and the model. Actually, all 3 have their own limits. Let's set aside the user for now. The most interesting boundary is the environment. I think the environment is the most crucial part of an agent because it defines how the agent interacts with the outside world. For instance, Manus currently opts for the most universal environment, a virtual machine running Ubuntu. But we're reinvesting heavily here. We have an internal virtualization team. Some people might misunderstand, thinking Manus assigns a physical computer to each user. That's not the case. Behind every Manus session is an independent, disposable sandbox. So our scalability is actually quite high. We sometimes joke internally that Manus is essentially a personal cloud computing product, because it truly lets non-programmers operate cloud resources, leverage computing power, and apply it in their daily lives. But this area comes with many challenges to solve, like how to scale out more sandboxes. Not too long ago, a few months back, we launched a feature called wide research. It's not deep research, but broad research. For example, if you try to complete a task like this, in other AIs, say, find all the CEOs of AI marketing companies from Y Combinator S last batch, and email me their contact info, you'll find that any AI besides Manus will fail. They re-limited by context windows and issues like model laziness. You might notice they start strong, finding maybe 10 or 15 CEOs, but then the quality drops sharply and the model gives up. But because we can continuously scale out, not just scale up, Manus can say, okay, this task is tough. I might need to find over 100. Let me spin up 100 sandboxes to work on this in parallel, then consolidate the results. So we constantly expanding the boundaries in virtualization. That's the foundation. At the same time, we're always adding more types of virtual machines we can use. Initially, we only had a VM based on the Linux kernel. We deliberately avoided using container tech like Docker because containers rely on Linux kernel CG groups. That path would be simpler, but it would tied us to Linux, and many professional software tools only exist in the Windows ecosystem. So we chose a more robust approach, building on Firecracker, a lightweight but full virtualization solution. Now, Manus can also run Windows, which is another boundary we're pushing, besides function calling, which is the common way models interact with the outside world, often called tool use if you give a model a full virtual machine. The pre-installed software inside becomes really interesting. It's like if your Windows system comes with professional software, your range of possible actions expands dramatically. So we actually maintaining a Linux distribution specifically designed for agents, packed with tools that only Manus knows how to use to accomplish certain tasks. That's what we're exploring on the environment side. As for the model aspect, I should mention that while we don't T-train our own models, we've been subtly influencing this space behind the scenes. It's quite fascinating. When you have enough influence, your needs can actually shape how models develop. We've recently seen very positive feedback on this. Because Manus consumes a massive amount of tokens, we're naturally one of the top customers for almost every model provider. We have deep collaborations with companies like Google and OpenAI. How large is your token consumption? I can share exact numbers, but I can say, we're likely among the top 2 to top 5 consumers globally for each major model provider. How do you cover these costs? That's why we built a product that can generate revenue user payments turn into token consumption. Are you covering costs already? We're almost there. And the optimization curve is moving very quickly. After our launch in March this year, we were indeed in the red, operating at a loss. But now we're close to breaking even and even turning a profit. That fast? Yes, I think that's partly due to technological foresight. And also because you can just passively accept things you have to actively influence model providers' decisions. Which brings me back to what I was saying earlier. Roughly how many times more tokens do you consume compared to a typical chatbot? Well, it depends on how you calculate it. Let me give you a comparison. We previously worked on Monica. And when you're rebuilding a chatbot, you always estimate costs based on input tokens and output tokens, and these two differ a lot. In transformer architectures, input involves prefilling, which is compute bound and can be processed in parallel. Output involves decoding, which is bandwidth bound, and pricing differs. Generally, output tokens are much more expensive than input tokens. So for chatbots, cost estimates often use a 3-to-1 ratio, 3 for input, 1 for output. But in an agent like Manus, the input to output ratio ranges from 100 to 1 to 1000 to 1. Depending on the task type. So if output lengths are similar, you can estimate the input lengths. So you could say there is a gap of tens to hundreds of times in general token consumption. And one principle we always adhere to is that we never cut token usage just to save costs or speed things up. Quality comes first. We even take pride in consuming more tokens when it leads to better results. Tao has a dream. He wanted to build a machine that runs 24/7, consuming tons of compute power, and in return, he'd gain massive influence. And a lot of us in our circle have actually worked on models before. We know how to improve things, but we don't necessarily want to build it all ourselves. So we thought, could we outsource this? Like, we have deep partnerships with companies like Google. We can directly give them our requirements. And it is not just giving requirements, we help them build evaluations and even contribute to features. For example, I remember about 2 months ago, Gemini launched this new controllable parallel function calling feature. The initial definition, proposal, and implementation schema for that, I wrote those. So we can actually get them to help us implement things. There is a lot to explore here. For instance, I mentioned earlier, I think most models today are still primarily fine-tuned for chat. That is an interesting observation. If you look from GPT-3 to InstructGPT, the big change wasn't in the base model itself, but in the post-training, how you shape the model's output style and behavior. Take the earliest GPT-3 API. If you asked it, what is the weather like in Beijing? It wouldn't answer you instead. It would try to complete or even pair it back. You'd ask about Beijing's weather, and it might say, what is the weather like in Tokyo? What is the weather like in New York? It was mimicking your pattern, not answering. What InstructGPT and later ChatGPT achieved through post-training was teaching the model. I should answer this question. But this chat-focused design creates a natural problem. No matter how complex the user's question is, the model tends to try and answer it all in one go. But that is fundamentally different from how an agent should work. The core idea of an agent, like in the famous React paper, is this great abstraction. An agent operates in cycles based on user input or an observation from the environment. Called into observation, it chooses the most likely next action from its action space. So clearly, for an agent, after receiving a complex input, the right approach isn't to rush and answer everything at once. Instead, it should patiently try step by step, adjusting its plan based on the results of the previous step. If you think about it carefully, the operating mode of an agent isn't aligned with chat models. And this leads to many detailed issues. For example, many modern models have a patience problem. Why do we say that, especially when you force a chat model to handle long horizon agent tasks? You'll notice the quality of its work drops lower and lower. To some extent, it lacks genuine training on real agent trajectories, or its training data mixture might include some agent-like tasks, but it is still dominated by data designed for chat. A model's learning capability is incredibly strong. The distribution of your data heavily influences the model's style. For instance, when a model outputs to a certain point, or when its input token length reaches a certain range, it starts to feel an invisible context pressure. This pressure affects the probability of it outputting the EOS token next. EOS means end of sequence. When the model decides to output this token, it considers the entire task to be completely finished. The model can, in fact, actually sense and perceive this inherent operational pressure. Indeed, this characteristic is undeniably a problematic and detrimental element. It causes models specifically optimized for conversational chat interactions to act in a very rushed and often incomplete manner when engaging with more complex agent tasks. A common and identifiable symptom is you'll see it start frantically using bullet points towards the end, just listing key points, making things short. It is very common. Another point is these models haven't been specifically trained for modern context engineering. Let me give an example. Earlier, I mentioned I've been advocating for one context since early 2023. But I have a new idea now, a bold claim. I think context lengths above 200K aren't that important anymore. Why? Because compared to just having longer context, I believe it is more crucial for models to have compression awareness and awareness of compression itself. How do I explain this if you just let your context length increase indefinitely, even with KV cache to keep latency and cost lower? It is still a growing process, even with efficiency optimizations, and it is not worth it. What is more important should be this: letting the model know, my context is very long now. Can I offload some information from it, like externalizing it to a file system? It is like having a memory, just like a person. I don't need to keep everything in my head all the time. Human working memory is pretty bad, but I know about things. I can organize them into a document, put it in my Notion. I know when to retrieve it next, or I know I've done many things, but some parts aren't crucial. They're just process. Then I can perform compression, turning a segment of history into a very compact representation. But the model needs to understand that this information didn't just vanish, it was compressed. And making the model aware of compression requires specialized training. This is a point that models trained for chat haven't been well trained on. Also, as mentioned earlier, models like Claude 3.5 Sonnet didn't have very strong reasoning capabilities. And reasoning is a broad term. The most surface level reasoning phenomenon might be models like the O1 series, where after a user asks a question, it has a long internal chain of thought before outputting the final answer. But if you blindly apply this to agents, you'll find issues. For example, you might see its instruction following ability actually decrease. Also, the probability of hallucinations and hallucinated tool use increases. So if you directly transplant a reasoning model designed for, say, competitive programming or math into an agent scenario, you'll find the actual effectiveness drops. So we should change the training paradigm here. Maybe we should focus more on something like interleave thinking. Following the React framework, after you get an observation, you shouldn't immediately rush to predict the next action. Instead, you do a brief intermediate bit of thinking. Think, okay, I've done these things. What should I do next? It is a structure like that. It is not like having an O1 style model solve a math problem where the user gives a short prompt and it generates thousands of tokens internally all at once. That is not right for agents and can even have negative effects. Unfortunately, this might sound simple, but honestly, nobody is doing a particularly great job with it yet. Current model companies not doing great here. There's definitely a lot of room for improvement. So I'm really looking forward to the progress on this front. And luckily, because we have some influence, I can keep nudging these model companies every day saying, this is important, this is important, this is important. And they are indeed actively working on improving these things. So when Gemini 1.5 came out, we were really excited, right? Because they were able to very quickly turn the problems we'd encountered into actual model improvements. And what is also great is that advancements from the leading flagship models gradually influence all the open source models everyone follows suit. So that is something I am really happy about. It feels like the whole world is helping us build models together, but we're not pouring tons of our own money into it. Instead, we offer users a great product. They pay us, and we create value for them. At the same time, we gain influence through this, which helps attract others to assist with training. It is a great model. It actually saves us a lot of internal research overhead. This allows us to truly invest in non-consensus or niche areas. Which model providers do you communicate with the most? Honestly, it is pretty evenly distributed. I think different model providers are quite differentiated right now, not necessarily in their technical approaches, but more in their focus areas. This might also be a passive choice. For example, if you were talking about real agent coding, not competitive programming, but more like practical multi-round engineering coding, Claude is still the best. Even with Claude 3.5, I think many people underestimated it as a huge leap. So Anthropic is very advanced in coding.
Then there is Gemini. Obviously, its multimodal capabilities, especially in multimodal understanding and input, are incredibly strong, like top tier strong. Google also has some unique resources, for instance. Gemini might be the only way you can access Google's search index. At the same time, if you want an agent to understand videos, especially YouTube videos, you definitely choose Gemini. As for OpenAI, they've invested heavily in reasoning, or pure reasoning tasks, and they have a strong lead there. Sometimes if you are aiming for benchmarks, the Claude models are a great choice. And then there are others like Grok and some open source models, each with their own strengths. So I think it is a really exciting time for those of us building applications. Which one gives you the most feedback for improvements? I'd say it depends on efficiency. Currently, the top providers like Google, OpenAI, and Anthropic all respond pretty quickly, of course, since we use different models for different scenarios. The efficiency in solving problems also depends on the difficulty of the problem itself, right? You teach them, and they might turn around and copy your product. But you can't copy their models as quickly. So what do? What is your barrier? I think it is speed. First, you'll notice that some model companies occasionally publish research blogs. When we read those, we feel both happy and a bit frustrated, because it is often something we've already been working on, like they just wrote a blog about it, such as Thinking 2 or Diagasum, something we launched a month before their blog. Recently, there was that thing about calling MCP with code progressive disclosure and so on, stuff we've already had in place, but I think that is fine. It is a symbiotic relationship. For us, the real advantage is twofold. First, since we use different models for different scenarios, it doesn't matter. We can always provide users with the best experience possible. That is point one. Point two is their speed. Once vertical integration happens, you definitely can't move as fast as we do because product iteration is just too rapid. They're specialized, we're integrated. Exactly. So it is actually the opposite, which is interesting and counterintuitive.
Yes. Yes.
If it were all intuitive, I don't think we'd be the ones doing it. Why is that? Why would an application company take on an integrated role while model companies become vertically integrated? Narrowing their focus, I think it comes down to the company's core foundation. Let's take OpenAI as an example. I've been saying I really respect OpenAI. They're truly, how should I put it, respectful of the bottom-up approach. Many friends at OpenAI, they really can start with a small group's innovation and gradually build it into a product. But actually, I think this relates to what I call buying model lottery tickets. Your approach is to build a scenario based on a breakthrough. But for us, all external innovations are like nutrients, a supply. So we don't have to choose. We don't have to buy into that model lottery. As an application company, compared to model companies, I think there's another advantage. People often think intelligence improvements don't need users. At least before DeepSeek came out earlier this year. DeepSeek didn't have many users, right? But you could still make improvements through methods like RLHF. However, for agents, especially in long chain, environment-dependent scenarios, users are actually crucial. But user interaction data and feedback stay at the application layer. They don't flow back to the model layer. So application companies now have a unique data flywheel. That is why companies like Windsurf and Cursor can develop models that are nearly frontier level, but low cost and tailored to their needs, all built on a pre-trained base. I think this will be a significant change in the next 6 months or so. We'll see more application layer companies leveraging their data flywheels, turning them into models to show that products can keep evolving. What is your user profile? Like, our user profile in the broadest sense is what I'd call prosumers. We can break it down into a few common types. For example, the first group encompasses individuals employed within internet or tech companies. These are typically not the primary decision makers broadly, but rather white-collar professionals or remote workers. The second distinct group consists of independent professionals, specifically freelancers or solo entrepreneurs. In the US, a significant number of people are self-employed, undertaking contract work or running their own small businesses. They're one user segment. The third major group is finance and consulting professionals. I think they share a common trait, strong self-motivation, and high-value tasks. That is pretty interesting. We found that building agents, at least for us, isn't about creating tools. If you are building a general purpose agent, you are not making a tool. You're not making a tool, you're creating something more like a person. If you're building a vertical agent, you might still be making a new kind of tool. But a general purpose agent is like a person, a vertical tool. For example, an automotive company might build the driver Lava as like a designer, but it is actually a tool for designers. Whereas Nanoso, as a general agent, I could even use Lava through it. So what is the abstraction level of Max? It is about what tools we design for the agent to use, or where the boundary lies when interacting with the outside world. Here is how we've always thought about it. Imagine I am just an ordinary person. I can do a lot of things because I have a computer. The interface between me and the computer, what is it? My right hand can use the mouse, and my left hand can use the keyboard. I can see what is on the screen with my eyes, and I can hear his voice with my ears. That is it. As a remote worker, using such a simple standard interface, you can actually accomplish almost endless types of tasks. So recently, we've seen a pretty encouraging result. Scale AI just released a new benchmark called RLI, the Remote Labor Index. It is called the Remote Workforce Index, and it is included in this benchmark. Of course, with Banners being a solo project, it naturally took first place. We outperformed competitors like Cloud and Jameson, among others. But why do we place such high importance on this benchmark? Because its evaluation criteria are really interesting. It assesses whether the work completed by an AI system is something a real client would be willing to pay for. And it's impossible to tell whether it was done by a human or an AI. Now, even though we currently state of the art, our completion rate is only about 2.5. So we still a long way from 100. But the reason we're so excited about this benchmark
is that it perfectly aligns with what we envisioned it measures, how well an AI can perform tasks that remote workers typically handle. That leaves a lot of room for interpretation.
Right.
So even if I am only at 2.5 on Mercedes 2 right now, does that mean we could potentially help accelerate 2.5 of the world's GDP? Exactly. So it is a really exciting dream. And as we all know, progress is still happening. Even though some say advancements have slowed down, I believe evaluation is what truly matters most. Is it because it guides us toward our direction, or is it both taste and direction? So I think maybe by 2026, being optimistic, we could potentially hit 2.5 and reach 2030. Right? That would actually account for a pretty significant scale in economic production. What does your data flywheel look like? Now, the data flywheel is like this. It can be compared to something like a chain reaction. I think there are a few really interesting points to talk about. So if you're using ChatGPT when the AI gives you an output you're not happy with, you might react in one of two ways. One option is to simply hit the retry button. It'll generate a new response, kind of like rolling the dice again to see if you get a better result. Or you could go back and tweak your original prompt. But I've noticed that in agent-based scenarios, users tend to do this instead. So he teaches the agent. Let me give you an example. For instance, I often ask Manus to help me screen resumes, but the criteria he uses aren't quite what I am looking for. So I tell the manager, hey, that's not quite right. The ones I like, you should pay attention to those. Next time, maybe give me an Excel file or something. Basically, I am constantly teaching the agent. That is one way of teaching. Now, that's the second way. So if there are certain tasks, even if they don't involve my personal preferences, where the agent is likely to get them wrong, then I'll step in and fix it. I'll help correct it, for example. I might tell Manus, this is T right. I've already updated the file to the correct format for you. And getting these two pieces of data was actually extremely difficult, especially back in the early days of the startup. But once you have a large user base, you can actually do something. You could broadly call it learning based on collective feedback, achieving a kind of online learning, though. I really don't like the term online learning. I'll get to that later. But what it actually accomplishes is that even without touching the model, we can gain a sort of self-evolving capability when it is parameter-free, meaning no parameterization is involved. But as more users engage with it, we can integrate more common shared failure patterns and user consensus into the system itself, making it native. Overall, the more people use it, the lower my failure rate becomes, and the fewer rounds it takes to complete the same task. That is the first type of data-driven learning. What is the second? The second approach is that we still rely on the most straightforward user feedback, like the 1 to 5 star ratings as a guide. Why? Because it ties back to what we just discussed. Evaluation is crucial. But honestly, I think the automated evaluation of agents still has a long way to go. Even if you have some automated verifiable benchmarks, like the ones we initially focused on, such as the suite or benchmarks. But in reality, we found that after actually launching, the architectures and models that performed well in this area didn't necessarily get high ratings from users. That is because users care about different things than what we might ideally focus on. For example, users are more concerned with the size when you sit down, whether the aspect ratio goes beyond 16 to 9. Is your website user-friendly and visually appealing? You mentioned earlier that the 16 to 9 aspect ratio can be automatically verified, right? But what does it mean for a website to be easy to use, achieving true ease of use? Is something you can fully accomplish with a completely automated reward model. That's why we heavily rely on direct feedback from users. And we have a dedicated team focused on evaluation, specifically subjective evaluation. So this is actually a method that allows us to iterate based on user feedback. How big is the team for this? Well, here is how we do it. We have a dedicated evaluation team. That team currently has fewer than 10 people, but they're responsible for building the entire system. Internally, we have a very robust evaluation framework and automation. At the same time, we have some more junior colleagues from the product team who are specifically focused on the main model validation. So it is an intersection of the tech and product teams totaling around 10 or so people, plus a rotating group of many interns. What are the key metrics you are focusing on right now? I have a few in mind. First, from the interface perspective, we were just talking about the interface at the API level. You can break it down into several different dimensions. Well, first off, I always emphasize coding. Coding is definitely a crucial point. Even though Manus isn't a coding agent, coding is really at the heart of Manus. So we're definitely keeping a close eye on Switch, but Switch is about to get totally flooded. So that is programming, that is one dimension. The second point is Mandarin. Even though it doesn't directly involve computer use, meaning we're not doing a lot through a GUI, we actually rely heavily on browser use. So in the end, that is something we're really focused on as well. That is essentially the comprehension capability of a GUI, which is one dimension. But it is also part of what we call multimodal input. So what is the third type? It is what we broadly call emergent capabilities. What do we mean by that? It is something everyone's really curious about. But honestly, not many reach the complexity level of something like Manus. That is because mastering this level of complexity is incredibly high. It involves multiple different action spaces. It is not just about the original voice-based command systems. Even when you are using our custom Linux distribution, there are tons of command line tools involved. It is not about the model's original voice. This kind of schema doesn't just exist on its own. It is built into the system, enabling the model to learn how to use specific software based on user documentation. That is actually a really key part. So when we look at the model's core capabilities, we focus most on these three aspects. But there are also some things that are really hard to measure, like what we were just talking about. For instance, aesthetics and self-awareness of errors. Actually, I think this self-awareness of errors is really important too.
It can be broken down into two levels, low dimensional and high dimensional. At the low dimensional level, after looking at many benchmarks, what you can see is that whether you are passing I1 or IK, you are essentially observing the model's state as it goes through the watch-out process. So a lot of the time, ideally, the model should be self-aware enough to recognize and fix its own mistakes. But more often than not, it is the user who spots an error and points it out. If you use AI for coding a lot, you might have had this frustrating experience. Whether it is with hot code or codex, you find a bug, you ask the AI to fix it, and the AI says, great, I've perfectly fixed that bug, but the car isn't just not fixed. It actually introduces another bug. Yeah, exactly. This metric is really hard to track because it often involves real human feedback in the middle. It is a higher dimensional issue. How do I put it? This type of error is when it produces something that works, but it can't quite push it to the next level, from being just usable to actually being good. We still consider that a type of error because we believe it can be solved. For example, Manus and many other coding agents can build web pages, but Manus can go a step further. Based on our general capabilities, after Manus finishes a web page, it can choose to run it in its own browser, play around with it, and check if everything matches the records in its database.
So I think that is one way to bridge this gap. Earlier, we used some expressions like the model being lazy and impatient, feeling pressured, or in a hurry, and Yang Zhulin once said, long text affect IQ. It seems the model state is quite similar to a human's. Why is that? Well, I think we're just using human-like terms to describe it.
I actually don't think models are like humans at all. Forcing an alignment between models or agents and human thinking systems isn't right. Didn't you just say you are building something human? Like, yes, but we're building a system that can do what humans do. You shouldn't impose human divisions of labor or specializations on the model. Let me give a more concrete example. For instance, many companies or developers working on agents have this guanxing sui. They want their multi-agent system to have roles like designer, programmer, manager, assigning all these different roles to the model. We think that is not quite right. Think about it. Why does human society have this structure? It is because, unfortunately, none of us are Chunnong. So within an organizational structure, you need this division of labor. But think about how much information gets lost in communication within our organizations and how much friction is added in collaboration. Models are actually more Chunnong than humans, so you should leverage their strengths instead of Caoxing Taoyong.
The constraints that come with humans, that is what I meant. So how should models be categorized? How should agents be classified? This topic of agent classification, I think.
You can only look at it from the input and output perspective. You think they don't need classification, I agree. They don't.
Mhm.
So what we're building is a general purpose agent. No, wait, I mean vertical. What I'm saying about input and output is a general agent places more responsibility for input on the user, right? And if you build a vertical agent, you actually do a lot more on the input side than we do. For example, if you are working in a specific vertical, your input data might come from a single user. It is unlikely to be self-generated or self-provided. It has to deeply integrate with an existing operational business system to get that input. And its output isn't delivered in a standardized form. Either it might be seamlessly passed to another system. So I think its inputs and outputs are definitely different from a general agent, and that determines what kind of vertical agent it is. But I believe the underlying technical solutions will eventually converge. Why are you building a general agent instead of an agent OS? Well, first, as programmers with professional integrity, we try to avoid the term OS. Why it is a holy grail, I am not worthy. That is point 1. Point 2 is, if you strictly define it, an OS is a middle layer. Of course, you could say an agent is a middle layer for many things too, but I don't think agents are at that stage yet. Users' files, user software, they're not on your platform. That is just the reality, right? So until you have those things, you shouldn't call yourself an OS. Who is suited for this? Will there be such a niche? I think so. For example, we have deep collaboration with Microsoft. As everyone saw at the recent Ignite conference, Manus has direct integration with Windows. Soon, you'll be able to use Manus from the Windows right-click menu. I don't think someone will create a groundbreaking agent OS out of thin air. Instead, all existing operating systems will gradually gain agentic capabilities. And the encouraging thing is, current OS vendors are approaching this with a very open mindset. For example, keep an eye on Microsoft Agent 365. Yes, you'll see Manus in there too. So I think it is like when we built browsers before. I don't believe in a sudden brand new agentic browser appearing. I believe all browsers will become agentic. What do you think the final agent ecosystem will look like? The final agent ecosystem, I think it'll be like this. Vertical agents will likely flourish. Though probably more on the top side, more vertical agents in top.
Yes, more.
Oh, why I'm referring to the overseas market. Okay, because first, we currently only operate overseas. And we think I shouldn't generalize about overseas, the US market. In the US, I feel most entrepreneurs are thinking one thing, I want to build a product for another startup to use and sell it to another company. I think many US entrepreneurs have lost the courage and drive to build for consumers. Do you mean Chinese American entrepreneurs or all US entrepreneurs, even the better off Chinese ones? Do Chinese entrepreneurs still have the dream? I think we're the brave ones, daring to do this. Why have they lost this? Well, over the past 10 years in the US, top attrition has been better. Actually, instead of lost, I'd say their environment has created this positive feedback loop. Their exit mechanisms are excellent and mature. Selling the company, yes, you can sell the company. Or if you build a top business, you have stable revenue and can go public or grow independently. So their paths to success have shaped the Qingxiang of the US capital market, right? So in the US, someone like us jumping out to do talk is really an anomaly. Of course, that also means some are willing to place big bets, right? Who is willing to place big bets? What kind of bets? Like we've secured some major backing. I'll just say that. But in China, I think the previous generation of entrepreneurs, my generation during the mobile internet era, many of us built for consumers and received a lot of positive feedback, making us bolder. So I think it is really a result of the different environments and the feedback loops on each side. So you don't think there is a niche for vertical TAC agents? Oh, I think there definitely will be. Definitely. But it is a bit lineal. A teammate of mine previously worked on a video editing software that was later acquired by Tencent. He shared an interesting perspective. Building vertical talk apps is very difficult. One challenging morsure is, for example, trying to build a better editing agent for video editors. He said that is extremely tough because professionals have extremely high standards for this. They view it from a risk control perspective. For example, if you have a complex workflow and any single step isn't done, right? For a professional, the whole thing is a zero. It is a multiplicative relationship, right? It just becomes unusable. So what kind of agent should you build? Build one for non-editors. For people who have editing needs but aren't editors themselves, like content creators. In that case, you are creating a tool for people who already have the need but can't fulfill it themselves. That is a competitive edge.
Yeah.
I think that is a crucial point. This idea has really influenced us. We often talk with our users or others, and they mention Manus. Although our product is an agent and feels very human, like we never approach it with the mindset of replacing people. Because if you give people the impression that you are trying to replace them, everyone starts thinking from a risk control angle. Like I just said, if one step is off, the whole thing is off. But really, you should think from an enhancement perspective, how to enhance people. It is about empowering your most efficient employees, or if you are self-driven. Once you get this tool, you can boost your productivity. That is a healthier and more realistic approach. So how will this ecosystem evolve besides general purpose agents and vertical B2B agents? What else? I think we'll see many entertainment-focused agents emerge, which are essentially broad consumer-facing agents. Yeah, and we'll have to see how that plays out. I am already seeing some interesting experiments.
Like?
Well, without naming names, some are creating a virtual agent for each person and having these agents socialize on behalf of their users. That sounds fun, but I honestly don't have deep insight into that area. So that kind of product feels more suited for OpenAI to tackle. And don't you think I feel like OpenAI could do any product. Do you think OpenAI will encroach on your niche?
Oh.
There will definitely be competition, but what we've observed is this. First, before ChatGPT's agent feature came out, we kept getting asked, what will you do if OpenAI does it? And they did. Yeah, they did. But clearly the results haven't matched Manus. As I mentioned earlier, we can leverage all the best options available globally. While OpenAI still excels in its own domain, that is point 1, point 2, is related to user perception. The ChatGPT agent is still part of ChatGPT. I think ChatGPT is a fully realized product. The chatbot war is over. Everyone uses ChatGPT, but objectively, the number of people who actually need a full agent is an order of magnitude smaller, right? So we've always taken a top-down approach, targeting the users we initially reached. Think about how Madness gained traction in the US. It started with Silicon Valley elites, like Patrick Collison and Jack Dorsey discovering. It was genuinely useful for boosting their efficiency. So we've consistently served a user group with a higher willingness to pay than the typical ChatGPT user. For quick QA or low-cost tasks, even I use ChatGPT instead of Manus half the time. I see it as a layered market. We'll long-term focus on providing the best AI for those with truly high-value needs, rather than competing with ChatGPT for the broadest, most basic user base. So chatbot users and agent users aren't entirely the same group. The overlap isn't complete. It is not complete. It includes people like us. But ultimately, we must serve those users with the highest quality demands, who have definitely tried ChatGPT, but still choose Manus. That is the group. Essentially, ChatGPT hasn't fully met the needs of this segment. Exactly. Or we must ensure we always deliver a better experience than ChatGPT's agent. That is the current focus. What about the future? Will they catch up? Will they catch up? Well, we'll keep advancing too. I often say, how does a small company compete with giants by becoming a giant yourself? How far are you from being a giant? Still far, very far, but we're working on it. Long term, what should the ideal Manus look like? The ideal Manus. Actually, I want to circle back to a point we touched on earlier, but didn't finish about boundaries. Those three things. Earlier, we mentioned there are three systems with three elements: the model, the environment, and the user. Honestly, what we're focusing on next, I hesitate to call it the future form, because for a startup, even thinking 3 months ahead is daunting. But in the next 3 months, we'll focus on one thing. The user is also an editor. What is the bottleneck? It is that no matter how smart an agent is, and no matter how smart an agent is, or take Madness compared to a chatbot, the biggest change is its output isn't just a block of text, it is an action, a series of actions, or different outputs. But so far, its starting point still seems to be a prompt. For users, crafting prompts is a hassle, and a bigger issue is that a lot of context isn't brought in. So we've been thinking how to optimize this. And earlier we mentioned John Dao's dream of building a 24/7 reasoning machine. So a direction we'll invest in, which might represent manners in the near future, is proactiveness. That word, actually. I think Omi popularized it, but it is really the core meaning of agent. Agent comes from agency, meaning the capacity to act, to be proactive, right? But previously, people might have focused more on the output. Now, it is time to focus on context again. It is like OpenAI created ChatGPT, but Monica focused on the input context. We want to do that even better, but we don't think it should be like ChatGPT's hosts, right? The kind that pushes a lot of content at you daily, which actually consumes user time. The users who pay for manners and truly derive value need productivity and efficiency gains. So we should focus more on how to let the agent proactively accomplish more tasks. Yeah, we already have a prototype internally that we're using extensively. How does it proactively complete tasks? I can't share too many details yet, but I can give an example. For instance, in our daily work, after conducting interviews, we might use third-party tools like Ashby to write reviews and evaluations. We do the evaluating ourselves, but writing all the descriptions is time-consuming during the interviews. We might take notes in Notion or Granola. Without this new AI system, we'd have to manually transfer notes from yesterday's interview into those evaluation forms. But with proactiveness, Manners could, every morning before I wake up, check my Notion, automatically fill the records into Ashby and just ask for my approval. So the goal is to remove that user bottleneck and let the agent's proactivity shine. That is a key focus for the near future. Initially, I think you wanted people to understand you better, so you use the concept of a general agent.
Do you think general agent is the most fitting long-term term for Manus? Not necessarily, maybe not even to help users understand. You know, that video we made, the whole production took about 3 days. That part, he edited it himself. Himself. Why was there that black screen saying the world's first general agent?
So something kind of silly happened in the middle there. We were recording on the first floor of our office, and a cleaning lady walked in behind us. So we had to cut that part out, just chop it out. You know, then the screen goes black. And that is it. We just had to give it a definition. So we all thought about it. And medicine came up actually from the start. We hadn't really figured out what this thing even was. How do you even define it? Right. Who is it really serving? Because our idea was to observe, to create content for creators, and we wanted a kind of framework, but then people come in and it's not just a framework, it is more like a playground. So then the responsibility fell on me since I had to write the video script. I thought, what should we call this? Yeah, so this whole concept was pretty much thought up on the spot. And then everyone just went with it. I feel kind of bad about that, honestly.
Right. But we feel like this term is a bit too technical. It comes from general purpose agent. And it kind of seems like it was chosen just to stake a claim. Everyone's saying 2025 is the year of the agent. So you want to grab the biggest niche, right? That is why we picked this term. But actually, no, it was really because of that cleaning lady incident.
From a marketing perspective, I don't think it is the best choice. For people who aren't into tech, it is like, what is this? It sounds weird. So what we really want to emphasize now is that building a general purpose agent is a technical decision for us. Like I explained earlier, if you have a better technical architecture, you can actually create great synergy between different scenarios, and they can enhance each other's network effects. For example, take our new Manus EDR physical head. We've been highlighting its website building capability. We only developed that feature in less than a month, but the results are absolutely top notch. That is because it is built on top of a unified agent architecture. It is like the last mile, but for users, we don't really need to explain all this. In the future, our communication with users will be entirely based on their needs. Like if you are a business, you might care more about internal tools, building those. So we tell them Manus is a great tool for building internal systems, and it can help connect all the different parts compared to all the vertical products out there. I want to stress this. Manus can do everything. It can do things just as well, if not better, and it can go one step further. That is how we define it. I think in the future, people shouldn't get too hung up on the term agent. It is just a new kind of thing. Like, do people need a design-specific agent maybe because it needs to fit into your specific workflow? It is like in the design field before AI, you had Final Cut Pro and Johnny coexisting. Do you think Manus will narrow its focus? Oh, you mean converge into a few more vertical areas? No, we won't. We'll be doing a lot of what we call scenarios. For instance, our top scenarios right now are batch file processing, website generation, and slides generation. But we've never made a separate product called Manus Slides or Manus Website Builder. They're all under this unified agent architecture with our product team optimizing the last mile experience. So Manus will always be a system that continuously optimizes top scenarios while maintaining strong versatility. It is a choice, a deliberate one. What do you think the long-term relationship will be between agents like Manus and design-focused agents like Lover will? I think Lover Party will definitely become more specialized. Manus might have some design capabilities, but like I said, Lover is for designers, while Manus is for non-designers who have design needs. And there's another dynamic. That is why we really emphasize our concept of connector or integration, connecting and integrating. The reason Manus is a general purpose agent is that it can mimic a person. It can mimic someone using various tools. For example, internally, we often use Manus to debug Manus. If you are a designer, you are not designing 100 of the time. Sometimes you might need to create a design based on product requirements. There could even be a use case where you are discussing a product on Slack, and you can have Manus monitor the Slack channel and use Lover Art to get the job done. So I don't see Manus competing with anyone. We're more like a node in a network. Often, the value isn't in the nodes themselves, but in the connections between them. What is your take on the current relationship between Cursor and Claude? That is a bit awkward. They've chosen the most intense battleground AI coding, which isn't really a vertical, it is a general capabilities. But I think Cursor is incredibly strong. On one hand, they've inspired a lot at Manus. On the other, I believe Cursor's talent pool is on par with the top companies. Or rather, the teams at those big companies directly competing with Cursor are comparable to Cursor's. As I mentioned earlier, the way for a startup to compete with giants is to become a giant yourself. I am not saying we'll surpass them in scale, because a giant won't throw all its resources at just one competitor. What we need to do is ensure that our team working on Manus is much stronger than the teams at certain big companies working on similar things. That is enough. So how many people do you have? Now, we're close to 100. Cursor and Claude. I think another point is that Cursor has more flexibility than Claude. Claude Code is still an extension of Claude. Of course, everyone's diversifying now. Claude has some unique advantages in coding, but precisely because coding is the main track, everyone's catching up really fast. For example, after Gemini 3 came out, people noticed that Gemini